Hello friends. This is Fictional Vortex. How are you all? So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was a ninja of the demon village. After failing his genin exams for the third time, Naruto runs away from Konoha, only to run into a ninja of the demon village. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Uzumaki of the demon village. Naruto glared at the two men before him, Mizuki and Iruka. Mizuki had just told him the secret that everyone in Konoha knew, except him. He was the demon fox. How? Why? Naruto hated them for this. Why did they keep that from him? Naruto stood there, staring wide-eyed at Mizuki, who chuckled evilly. Just give me the scroll, demon fox. No, leave him, Iruka cried, desperate. Naruto looked at Mizuki first, and then at Iruka. Suddenly, Naruto threw the scroll from him and ran. He wanted to get away from here, as soon as possible. Naruto! He heard Iruka scream behind him. Naruto ignored the cry and ran on. He had to get out of here. Not just the area, but the village as well. He ran in the direction of the village gates, hoping that the two senseis wouldn't follow him. The gate was still open when Naruto approached it and he ran out. At first, he stuck to the path, but then thought better of it and jumped into the trees. All night he ran as fast as he could, to get away from the village that hated him so much. The village that refused to recognize him. Naruto stopped, tired. He was hungry as well. He had retreated a long way from Konoha, but there was still the threat that they would search for him. And he refused to go back to that village. Just then, Naruto could smell the tantalizing smell of food. He jumped down from the tree and peered through the bushes onto an empty camp. There was a small tent and a fire, with a bubbling pot beside it. Naruto stared at it for a long time, deciding whether to sneak in and steal food to eat. Suddenly, there was a hand on his shoulder. He yelped and turned around sharply. Before him stood a tall 6-foot man with untamed black hair. He had narrow, purple, slanted eyes and elegant nose and mouth. His ears were slightly pointed, making him look elfish. He wore an armored plate on his chest with shoulder plating on his right shoulder. On his lower arms, he wore some layered plates, leaving his long thin fingers bare. His muscled stomach was left bare and he wore tight leather trousers with knee-high boots with shin guards on them. He wore a purple sash around his middle that was tied on the left side of his hip and hung loosely down his left thigh. He was also very thin, almost on the verge of emaciation. What Naruto noticed was his forehead protector. It represented a slitedi with thick eyelashes. He also had a small silver badge on his sash with the same symbol. The man looked down at Naruto, an eyebrow raised. Thinking of stealing my breakfast, boy? Naruto shook his head violently and said, "No, I'll go steal someone else's." The man looked at Naruto and asked, "Where are you from?" "Konoha, but I ran away." "Really? Why?" "I don't want to talk about it." The man knelt in front of him, looking closely at Naruto's face, and with one long finger and a frown, traced one of Naruto's whisker marks. The man stood up again and then asked, "What's your name?" "Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto was not prepared for the man's reaction. The man stared at him, his mouth slightly open. "Uzumaki?" the man asked, as if amazed by Naruto's name. Naruto nodded, startled. What was so great about his name? The man shook his head and held out a hand. "My name's Morphran Kenjiro. Would you like to have breakfast with me?" Naruto grabbed the man's hand and nodded, his stomach grumbling loudly. The man chuckled and Naruto followed him into the camp. The man sat by the fire and looked into the bubbling pot as Naruto sat on the opposite side of the fire. "Seems to be ready," he noted. He pulled out 2 bowls and filled them up with the meat stew, handing one to Naruto. Naruto eagerly took the bowl and started to eat heartily. Kenjiro ate his much lower and with much more dignity than Naruto. When Naruto had finished his bowl, he placed it in front of him and hung his head, dropping off to sleep. "Where are you going now, Naruto?" Kenjiro asked. Naruto shrugged. "I don't know. I want to be a ninja, but Konoha won't let me." Kenjiro was silent for a while and then asked, "Why do you want to be a ninja?" "So that people will recognize me for whom I am." Kenjiro fell silent and Naruto then felt himself falling asleep. Kenjiro stared at the boy who had just fallen asleep, still sitting up, before falling slowly onto his side. Kenjiro then silently packed up his camp, and when he was done, he stood over the Uzumaki boy, Naruto. He couldn't leave the boy here. There were Konoha ninja in the vicinity, obviously looking for him. Kenjiro looked at the boy's whisker marks again and then said quietly, "Well, Kyubi no Yoko. I never thought to find you in an Uzumaki. This does surprise me." Kenjiro then gently picked Naruto up, deciding to take the boy to his native village, the hidden village of the demon, knowing the boy would get what he so craved for in that village. He would talk to the Akikage, the leader of the demon village, and tell him that he wanted Naruto to become a ninja. He would make an excellent ninja, Kenjiro thought as he carried the boy down the road. Iruka stared out the window of his house. Soon after Naruto had left the scroll, Mizuki had picked it up, saying he was off with the scroll. Unfortunately for him, other shinobi in the vicinity heard this and stopped him. Iruka then went to look for Naruto, but couldn't find any traces. He then resigned and went to the Hokage, explaining what happened in Naruto's disappearance. The Hokage was worried and sent out search parties. And Iruka went to go as well. Iruka went out of the city and raced along, and somehow finding himself separated from his comrades. He swore, and then, through the gap in the trees, he saw a tall thin man carrying something. Iruka came closer and realized that the man, a demon ninja to judge by his forehead protector, was carrying an unconscious Naruto. Iruka narrowed his eyes and jumped in front of the man, and demanded, "Give Naruto back." The man cocked his head down at Iruka, an eyebrow raised. "Why? He is to be taken back to his village, Konoha." The man chuckled and looked at the sleeping Naruto. "He doesn't want to go back. What will he go back to?" Iruka stood there, lost for words. He's hated by his village, what's the point in staying there? Iruka stared helplessly at the man. The man glanced again at Naruto and said, "I know that Kyubi is sealed within him. That is why he cannot go back to Konoha. Instead, I shall take him to the demon village, where he can get what he wants. Don't try and stop me, I will kill you if you do." Iruka took out a kunai and said, "Please don't take him." "Why? What is he to you?" "He is a student and I care for and I want him to become an excellent Konoha shinobi. Please give him back. I will tell him that you care for him, but for now, he shall remain with me." He then walked on past Iruka. Iruka stared at the man, wanting to take Naruto from this stranger. The man looked over his shoulder. "Don't worry, he is safe with me. I will not let any harm come to him, that is a promise. I'm sure he will return to Konoha someday, but for now, he will become a demon ninja, like me." And with that, the man disappeared. Iruka blinked, and then shouted, "Naruto, what's the matter?" asked one of his comrades behind him. "A demon ninja has Naruto." "A demon ninja?" came a frightened voice from behind him. Iruka nodded. To be honest with himself, he was surprised he could face the man. The man was a Chaldea, to judge by the badge he wore on his sash. Chaldeas were much feared as they were the most dangerous and unpredictable ninjas in the world, and they knew it. So they would press their authority every chance they could, even in other villages. Iruka shook his head and said, "We should go back. We won't be able to get him back now." The others nodded and they returned to Konoha. Iruka immediately went to the Hokage tower to report their failure. He knocked on the office door and heard the reply to come in. He walked in and saw that the Hokage was sat, talking to a silver-haired shinobi, by the name of Hitaki Kakashi. Iruka nodded at Kakashi and turned to the Hokage. "I'm sorry, we were too late." "What do you mean, too late?" Iruka took a deep breath and said, "A demon ninja has him. He said that he will make Naruto into a ninja of the demon village. And he said that if we tried to get him back, he would kill us, which I'm sure he will, since he's a Chaldea." The Hokage and Kakashi stared at Iruka. Kakashi sighed and said, "There's no hope now, we can't get him back." The guy sounded like he was serious. Iruka nodded and replied, "That's not all. He knows that Naruto has Kyubi sealed inside him." The Hokage grunted and said, "I'm not surprised. I heard that Chaldea are able to find demons anywhere, no matter how well they're hidden. The reason, I have no idea. So, what are we going to do?" Kakashi sighed again and lazily looked out of the window and said, Nothing for now. All we can do is wait. Naruto slowly woke up. He opened his eyes and saw that he was inside a small tent, with a light blanket over him. He sat up and peered out. It was sunrise. He crawled out and looked about and spotted Kenjiro sat beside the fire, staring thoughtfully into the forest. Naruto stood up and yawned, wondering where he was, for he knew that they were nowhere near Konoha. Kenjiro looked around at him and said, "I was wondering how long you were going to sleep for. You slept all day and through the night. You must be hungry." Naruto nodded as Kenjiro waved a hand at the dried meat beside him. Naruto went to him, picked up the meat and began to eat. He looked around and asked, "Where are we?" Kenjiro glanced at him and said, "A long way from Konoha." Naruto stared at the man. He shrugged and said, "I think you have potential. I'm taking you to the hidden village of the demon." "Really?" Naruto asked, curious. Kenjiro nodded and pointed at Naruto's whisker marks. "Judging by those whisker marks on your face, you are the host to Kyuubi." Naruto stiffened and glared at the man, ready to bolt. Kenjiro waved a hand in reassurance. "Don't worry. Villagers think that demon hosts are something like gods. I mean, they think that the host has all the abilities of that demon and demon villagers worship demons." Naruto blinked and stared at Kenjiro, stunned. The man chuckled and said, "I take it that you were not very well liked in Konoha." Naruto shook his head and said, "I only just found out about it. I mean, they kept the secret from me for 12 years. I hate Konoha. I never want to go back." Kenjiro nodded, as if in understanding. "The village is just a few days' walk from here. Do you want to come? You can become a genin at the demon village." "Really? Are you serious?" Naruto asked, staring at the man in shock. The man chuckled and said, "Eat up. We have a long way to go." When Kenjiro said, "a few days," he meant 2 weeks. With Naruto complaining all the way. Kenjiro, however, was oblivious to the young boy's complaints, but he would be glad to get back home. Soon, they saw the gates of the hidden village of the demon, which had the village symbol engraved on the heavy gates. On each side of the closed gate, stood 2 tall, scary-looking guards. They took one look at Kenjiro and immediately opened the gate, and bowed as he walked past. Naruto, as Kenjiro could see, was confused by this. He chuckled and placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "I have a certain reputation around here. No one wants to mess with me." Naruto looked up, confused. Kenjiro winked at the boy and continued to walk towards the center of the village. He saw Naruto looking around at everyone, who murmured their respects to Kenjiro while going about on their daily business of shopping and working. Every so often, he saw a demon ninja, on the rooftops or in alleys, watching the villagers silently, always on the alert. They didn't pay any attention to Kenjiro, but looked at Naruto with interest. Kenjiro frowned at them and they went off, too scared of the man to get any closer. What was up with them? Naruto asked Kenjiro, startling Kenjiro with his observation skills. "We do not really welcome strangers. Don't worry, you're with me, so you are welcome," Kenjiro explained. Naruto nodded, though Kenjiro saw his unsure expression. Kenjiro led Naruto to the center of the village, which held a large gray stone building with a heavy wooden door with the village symbol on it. Kenjiro knocked on the door 3 times and it opened slowly to reveal a dim long hallway. Kenjiro led Naruto into the building, fully aware of the boy's nervousness. At the end of the hallway, was a single wooden door. The Akikage had always liked his stone and wood, though Kenjiro had never really liked them, so he avoided the Akikage office whenever he could. But, he was here on business, so he had to come in. He opened the door to reveal the winding stone staircase that led to the office. He glanced at Naruto before starting the climb. After what seemed to be an eternity, the staircase stopped to reveal yet another door. Kenjiro knocked and waited for a reply. He heard the reply to enter and he opened the door to reveal the office. It was a medium-sized round room, with a deep red carpet. The Akikage was seated behind the large wooden desk, hidden by the shadows, in a large stone chair. Kenjiro looked behind him to make sure that Naruto had followed him in, and then approached the desk. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Naruto looking about at the various wall hangings about the room. The Akikage looked at Naruto, who now stood beside Kenjiro and asked, "Why do you bring this boy here, Kenjiro?" "This is Uzumaki Naruto. I am asking you to promote him to a genin of the demon village. The Akikage was silent for a while and then said, I thought the Uzumaki clan was wiped out 12 years ago. Kenjiro looked at Naruto and replied, he seems to be the only survivor. And not only that, but he is host of Kyubi no Yoko, so you would have accepted him anyway. Kyubi, that comes as a surprise. Fine, he shall remain here and be a genin of the demon village. You have a full team already, Kenjiro, so he'll be trained by Dakini Kometo. Understand. Kenjiro nodded and waved Naruto out of the room. When they exited, Naruto turned and asked, I'm glad that I'm a genin now, but where will I stay? Kenjiro scratched his chin, he hadn't thought of that. Then an idea hit him. I'm sure the Desdemona clan will let you stay with them. They love looking after guests, and they will be honored to look after a demon host. In fact, they have one of their own. I'll introduce you to them, come. Kenjiro led Naruto down several housing streets until he came to a series of buildings surrounded by a wall. He led Naruto through the main entrance of the wall and went to go into one of the buildings, a typical traditional Japanese house with the sliding doors. He slid open the front door and walked in, without bothering to take his boots off. Kenjiro stood in the hallway, waiting for Naruto to remove his shoes. Just then, a door on Kenjiro's right slid open to reveal a woman, staring at Kenjiro. Naruto came to Kenjiro's side, staring at the woman. She was small, a little less than 5 feet with brown hair tied in a bun with soft brown eyes. Her facial features were regular and pretty. She wore a simple gray dress, belted at the waist. She shifted her gaze to Naruto, who shifted slightly. Who's this Kenjiro? She asked in a sweet voice. Kenjiro put a hand on Naruto's shoulder and replied, this is Uzumaki Naruto. He is to be trained here as he is a demon host and I wish for him to stay here in your capable hands. The woman stared at Naruto, her mouth slightly open, and then smiled warmly at him. Of course he can stay here. Would you like something to eat, sweetheart? Naruto silently nodded and Kenjiro turned away. I shall leave you with Naomi, wife of the head of the Desdemona clan. I shall pick you up tomorrow morning. I have things to tell you and to introduce you to your new team. For now, goodbye. Naruto stared at Kenjiro's retreating back, and jumped slightly when Naomi put a hand on his shoulder. He looked at her smiling face and she said, I thought you were hungry. Come with me, I'll fix you something to eat and then I'll put you in one of the spare rooms. She took his hand and led him through the large house and into a kitchen that was the size of Naruto's apartment and had all the cooking utilities that a cooking expert would drool over. She sat Naruto at the large table and said, I'll make you some ramen, is that okay? Naruto nodded, pleased that they had ramen in this village. She smiled at him again and startled to bustle around the kitchen. Are your parents alive? She asked as Naruto leaned his arms on the table. No, they died soon after I was born, or so I'm told. Konoha never told me anything about my family, which I'm really curious about because everyone here makes a big deal out of it. Naomi snorted and said, well, I'm not surprised. The Uzumaki clan originated from the demon village. I'm sure that Kenjiro will tell you everything tomorrow, since you have a right to know your inheritance. Naruto nodded as she placed a large bowl of ramen and chopsticks in front of him. Thank you, he said and began to eat. It had been ages since he had ramen to eat, so it tasted really nice. Naomi made herself some herbal tea and sat opposite him. For a while, she drank her tea and Naruto ate his ramen. When he finished, he put the bowl down and exclaimed, that was really nice. Naomi chuckled and said, I'm glad you like it. She then stood up, taking the bowl and placing it on the side. I'll deal with that later, but right now, I need to set up a room for you, dear. Then, just as Naruto was about to reply, a voice shouted, Mother, in the kitchen, dear. Naomi shouted back. She went to Naruto and said, that's my daughter, she's a host as well. Naruto was curious, he had never met another host before, and he wanted to see what this one was like. Then, a girl, about 15 years of age, burst into the kitchen. She had curious golden eyes that showed that she was intelligent and she had arched eyebrows. Her lower face was hidden by a black mask. She had warm gray waist-length hair tied at the neck and near the waist. She wore a dark green top that stopped at the throat, with the mask material attached to it. The green material was cut so that it revealed her stomach. which was covered by the black material, as were her arms and hands. Her legs were also covered with the same black material, and she wore traditional ninja sandals. Around her waist was her forehead protector, and the green material hung from the waist, on the front and the back of the legs, similar to the way Sakura wore hers, but this girl's was mid-shin length. On her right leg was the traditional kunai pouch. The girl looked around the kitchen and spotted him and Naomi. She raised a questioning eyebrow when she saw Naruto. Naomi put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "This is Uzumaki Naruto. Kenjiro brought him here after he ran away from Konoha. He's a host, like you. Come over and say hi." The girl slowly came over and inspected Naruto, then held her hand out. "I'm Keiko. As you can guess, I'm part of the Desdemona clan. What demon are you hosting?" Kyubi no Yoko. Naruto replied as he took her hand, still feeling unsure about how casually people here talked about demons. The girl nodded and said, "I'm host to the eight-tailed demon, Desdemona. A wolf actually, hence the golden eyes and the gray hair. I see you have whisker marks. Interesting." Naruto nodded and she winked at him and then turned to Naomi. "Mother, I just thought to warn you, father's in a bit of a mood." "Why?" "Dunno, but he shouted at little brother." "Silly man, what are we going to do with him?" "Don't ask me, I'm just the messenger." Naomi sighed and then smiled at Naruto. "Don't mind my husband, Hiraku. He won't get to you. Not before he goes through me." Keiko nodded, absently playing with a kunai. Naomi, just as absently, took it off her and placed it in the drawer, ignoring her daughter's glare. "Shall we go fix you a room, dear?" she asked Naruto. She didn't wait for a reply, but grabbed Naruto's arm and led him out of the kitchen with Keiko following them. She led him down more corridors to the bedroom part of the house. Most of the doors were closed, but a few at the end of the long corridor. Naomi led Naruto to the nearest one of these and pushed him lightly inside. It was not a big room. Just big enough for the bed, a bedside table, a wardrobe and suitable space to move around freely. The bed was just the frame, with the mattress underneath it, wrapped in cloth to stop it from getting dirty. Naruto noticed that the room had a door that led out into a small garden with several cherry trees and a small pond in it. It was rather nice, so much better than his apartment in Konoha. Naomi brushed past him to the bed frame. She knelt and dragged out the mattress, pulled off the cover and placed it on the bed. "There, all I need to do is get the pillow and the covers. I'll be back in a few minutes." She then hurriedly left the room. Naruto stood staring out into the garden, thinking about what had happened these 2 weeks. He had left his native village, found a demon ninja, been accepted into a new village and been accepted into a major clan's household. He hoped that things wouldn't get too weird. "Did you bring anything with you, Naru?" To turn to see Keiko leaning against the door frame, looking out onto the garden. "No, I left in rather a hurry." "Why was that?" "Because I was hated by everyone, and no one would recognize me. All they saw was Kyubi. And that fox is something they would rather kill than let live." Keiko frowned. "No host is ever treated like that here. In fact, they're rather spoiled and respected. No one fears demons here. So you'll be just fine." Naruto blinked and shrugged, hoping it would be true. "Who gave you those horrible clothes?" Naruto, caught off guard, looked down at his horrible orange jumpsuit and said, "It was the only thing I can afford." Keiko cocked her head as if considering. She then clicked her fingers and said, "I know a shop in town that specializes in nin clothes. The man there, I can't remember his name, has a very good sense in what people look good in. I'll take you there tomorrow." "But I haven't much money," Naruto protested. Keiko chuckled and said, "No worries, you won't have to pay." Naruto frowned, not too sure. He was about to say something when Naomi came in carrying bed sheets and a lamp. She quickly made the bed and put the lamp on the bedside table. She looked about, satisfied. She then looked outside at the sun and said, "I'll start on supper. Keiko, be a dear and introduce Naruto to your father. I don't want him in the mood because we kept Naruto a secret. He would get upset if we had him to ourselves." She chuckled and patted Naruto on the head. "Go with Keiko, and mind your manners, Hiraku's big on manners. See you at supper." And with that she walked out. Keiko stared at her mother's retreating back and then turned to Naruto. I suppose you want to get it over and done with. Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed his arm and led him through yet more corridors. This house was huge for a single family to live in, but then they were part of a clan and the other clan members stayed here as well. They must be powerful clan, to have such a reputation. Well, Naruto assumed they did from Kenjiro. Keiko stopped in front of a large door and knocked. Yes, a low, but firm voice answered. It's me, Keiko. I have a guest for you to meet. There was a long silence and then the voice answered. Fine, bring them in. Keiko opened the door to reveal a large training room, the floor covered in soft mats. On the walls hung various, cruel-looking weapons. At the sides of the rooms were various training apparatus, obviously designed for the clan's special techniques. In the middle of the room sat a man of about 40, and a boy about 9 years of age. They had turned round and were staring at the newcomers. Keiko led Naruto into the room, and stood before the two. The man had short white hair, near to the scalp. He had gray eyes and a large nose, with a medium-sized mouth. He had a firm-shaped chin and a short beard. He wore a simple white kimono and sandals. The boy had his father's hair, but Naomi's eyes. His face was similar to Naomi's and he wore a kimono like his father, but his was gray, not white. The man, obviously Hiraku, looked at Naruto and asked Keiko. Who is this? This is Uzumaki Naruto. He ran away from Konoha a couple of weeks ago and has come to this village to become a ninja. He's a host, too. Hiraku stared at Naruto and said. Well, Naruto-kun, I feel honored to have you in my household. Thank you, Hiraku-sama. Naruto replied, remembering what Naomi said about formalities. Hiraku chuckled and said, I see you have manners. That's always good. Do you know much about ninjutsu? Not really. Konoha weren't that keen on teaching me. Hiraku frowned, but then smiled at him. Don't worry, you'll catch up soon enough. This is Masaru, my son. He said, indicating the boy. The boy smiled at Naruto and said, pleased to meet you, Naruto Onichan. Pleased to meet you too, Masaru-kun. Sit down. We'll talk until supper's ready. Hiraku said, patting the mat beside him. Naruto complied and they spent the evening talking away, and Naruto felt for the first time that these people wanted to know Naruto. Not the demon inside him. He forgot Konoha and was happy to be here, with people that truly liked him. Iruka stared out of the classroom window. He had assigned the teams of the new genin, and had dismissed them. He was thinking about Naruto. He wanted to know if the boy was truly alright. He sighed. There was nothing he could do about it. He hoped that Naruto would return to Konoha, so that he could apologize to the boy and make it up to him. Iruka thought about it. He would buy him all the ramen he wanted. Naruto would like that. He then heard a knock on the door and turned around to see Hinata standing there, twiddling her fingers. Yes, Hinata. Is it true? What is? That Naruto-kun ran away. I heard some villagers talking about it, and I was wondering if it was true. Iruka looked out the window again and said simply, yes. Silence. Thank you, Iruka-sensei. Hinata said extremely quietly and left Iruka to his own thoughts. Hinata walked along, extremely sad that Naruto had run from the village. She knew that the villagers hated him. Why, she didn't know. But did they push him far enough that he ran away? She walked past a couple of villagers and catching a bit of their conversation. I'm glad he's gone. Yay, now we don't have to worry about. Their conversation stopped when another person joined their group. Hinata sighed as she wanted to know why they hated Naruto so much. She was consumed so much in her thoughts, that she almost walked into Kiba, one of her teammates, the other being Shino. They were with the others Ino, Shikamaru, Choji, Sasuke, Sakura and Akacheta Ryo. Ryo was part of a clan that specialized in the taijutsu arts. Ryo was a short, skinny boy, though you could see the slight muscles under the simple t-shirt and shorts he wore. He wore traditional ninja sandals, but he wore shin and lower arm guards. He wore his forehead protector on his head, keeping back the messy light brown hair. He had bright hazel eyes that told people his mischievous nature. He had pretty features, which gave him almost as many fangirls as Sasuke. He was the kind of person to pull a prank whenever possible, and it was well known that he and Naruto had Prank wars where they would try and outdo each other in their pranks, which Naruto won by painting on the Hokage monuments. Hiba looked at her and asked, "What's wrong?" Hinata looked at the ground and said quietly, "Naruto-kun ran away." The group, minus Sasuke, gasped. "How did you find out?" Ryo asked. "I passed some people talking about it, so I went to Iruka-sensei and he said that it was true." "Ah, man. Does that mean we can't have any more prank wars?" "Damn it. Why did he leave?" Ino asked. Hinata looked at her briefly and replied, "I think it's the villagers. They hate him for some reason. Maybe they pushed too far, and he couldn't handle it." There was silence in the group. "I hope he comes back," Hinata said quietly, getting a silent assent from most of the group. Naruto slowly woke up. He turned on his side, and looked out the partially open door that led to the garden. It was sunrise. He lay there, thinking. What would happen today? Naomi said that Kenjiro would tell him about his family. What was so special about his family? Omi said that his family originated from this village. What was so special about them so that they would be remembered? Why hadn't anyone in Konoha told him anything? Were they afraid? Naruto clenched his fist. He hated Konoha. A knock from the door startled him and he jumped slightly. "You awake, dear?" Naomi's voice asked. "Yeah. Get dressed and then go to the kitchen, and I'll you breakfast before Kenjiro comes for you." "Okay." He then heard her walk away and sighed. He stood up and got dressed, having slept in just his boxers. He opened the door and retraced his steps from yesterday to appear in the kitchen. Naomi saw him and said, "Found your way okay?" Naruto yawned and nodded, grinning. He sat at the table and saw that Keiko was already up. She had her mask pulled down as she was eating rice. She was very pretty, Naruto noticed, with an elegant nose and a curved mouth that complemented her eyes and eyebrows. She grinned at him and waved the peace sign at him, which he returned. Naomi put rice in front of him and he ate eagerly. He soon finished and pushed the bowl away from him. Keiko looked at him, an eyebrow raised. "Hungry?" she asked. Naruto grinned and nodded. Just then, Kenjiro walked in. He stood beside the table and looked at him. "Ready." Keiko finished her bowl and replaced her mask. She stood up as Naruto did. "I'm coming as well. I told Naruto that I would take him to get new clothes." Kenjiro looked at Naruto and said slowly, "That would be best." Keiko laughed as Naruto stuck out his tongue at the man, who ignored him. Kenjiro led them out of the house and the Desdemona clan property. The village was empty as it was so early in the morning and not many people were up yet. Naruto was not a morning person, so he hated being up at this time. Kenjiro led them past all the housing and onto a grass field. "This is the training area. Not much, but hey, most people train at home." Keiko whispered at him. Naruto noticed that the field had a large rock in the middle of it, big enough to climb and train on. Kenjiro walked up to this rock and commanded them to sit down. Naruto and Keiko sat, leaning against the rock. Kenjiro sat cross-legged opposite them. He looked at the rising sun and said, "Kometo and your new teammates will arrive at noon, so we have plenty of time. And I think time enough for you to get a new outfit." He then turned back to Naruto and asked, "Do you know anything about your family and their abilities?" Naruto shook his head, getting more curious by the second. Kenjiro sighed and whispered, "Damn Konoha." He then looked Naruto in the eye and said, "You are an Uzumaki, the most powerful clan in history, with one of the most powerful advanced bloodline limits. Do you understand?" Naruto stared at him and asked, "What do you mean exactly?" Keiko blinked at him and said, "The Uzumaki was wiped out because people were afraid of their power. The Desdemona clan actually come from the Uzumaki clan, so we're related. You have special eyes. The Metsuki. The abilities, I think, include seeing through objects, copy jutsus with great accuracy, increased speed, increased strength, predict enemies' attacks accurately, read an enemy thoughts, able to disrupt chakra control, able to see the chakra system, see the heat spectrum. And you can dispel all levels of genjutsus. Look at the end for the full abilities of the whole bloodline limit." Closing parenthesis. Naruto blinked, not taking it in. Kenjiro cocked his head and said, "There are two other clans that have come off the Uzumaki line." Naruto looked at him, an eyebrow raised. "The Hyuga and the Uchiha clans." They have only a few of the Uzumaki abilities and added ones developed on their own. You mean I'm related to that Sasuke bastard? Naruto exclaimed. Kenjiro and Keiko blinked, looked at each other and then shrugged. But the point is, do you understand? The Uzumaki clan moved to Konoha soon after it was founded, which seemed to be a big mistake. You are the Uzumaki prodigy, so be expected to be treated with reverence as you are thought to be dead. Naruto looked at the ground. Thinking about it, his hate for Konoha grew. They didn't see Uzumaki Naruto, they just saw Naruto the demon host. He looked at them and grinned. Then I'll be the best ninja in the village. Kenjiro smiled slightly and said, that's the spirit. Keiko looked at the sun and said, shall we fit our little Uzumaki out, sensei? Kenjiro chuckled and nodded. There's time, he said. Naruto grumbled and asked, where are we going? I told you, to a shop I know. The guy has a good eye on what people look good in, come on. Keiko and Kenjiro then led Naruto to the center of the town. To a series of shops. They led Naruto to one shop that seemed a plain building with no windows in, and had a rusty tailor's sign above the door. They walked into the dim shop, which was surprising small, and Naruto couldn't see any clothes, only a counter with a door behind it, another door opposite the counter which Naruto guessed was the changing room, and a cabinet with measuring equipment in near the entrance. Naruto turned to Keiko and asked acidly, I thought this was a clothes shop. She cocked her head and said, it is. The clothes are kept out back. I told you, the man here has a good eye. She went to the counter and rang the bell. Coming. Be there in a minute. Came a voice behind the closed door that was behind the counter. A few seconds later, the door opened and a portly man came through. He was bald and had small blue eyes. His face was rather podgy and he was sweating slightly in the warm shop. He wore a simple shirt and black trousers. He looked at them and saw that Kenjiro and Keiko wear chaldea and he bowed deeply. What may I have the honor of doing, masters? Keiko waved a hand at Naruto and said, this is Uzumaki Naruto. He needs new clothes, can you do that? Yes, of course, straight away. Come here, young master. He went to the cabinet and got out some measuring tape. Yuto stepped forward and the man looked him up and down, frowning. Take the jumper off, Naruto-sama please. Naruto did so and Keiko commentated to Kenjiro. He looks skinny. You couldn't tell with that thing on. The man, who told Naruto that his name was Nobu, took measurements of Naruto's arms, waist, chest, legs and even the face. He then looked him up and down once again and disappeared through the back door. Naruto turned at Keiko, who was looking at him, her eyes twinkling with amusement, and he asked acidly. Shall we get you measured out too? No, I'm fine thank you. A couple of seconds later, Nobu came back with some black clothing and handed it to Naruto. There, put that on first and we'll see if anything is missing, okay? Oh and these, he said, handing Yuto a pair of black knee-high boots with shin guards on, like Kenjiro's. Naruto went to the changing room that Nobu pointed out and got changed. He looked in the mirror after he had finished and sniffed. He was wearing a leather vest with a few pockets on and leather trousers, and black leather gloves that left the fingers uncovered and went up to the elbow. He looked all right in it, he thought. He put the boots on and stepped out. Kenjiro looked him up and down. It suits you, he said. Keiko winked and said, watch out, you're gonna have half the village girls after you. Naruto stuck his tongue out at her as Nobu came up to him, frowning. Something's missing. Ah, I know, I'll go get it now. Then went into the back room again. They stood in silence for about 10 minutes. And then Nobu came back in carrying a full-length red leather coat, which he was holding up. It had a belt sewn into it, making the bottom half flare out slightly, and it had a slit up the back to the waist. It had a collar, similar to one on a blazer with silver studs lining it. Sorry I took so long, but I wanted to add something. He held up the coat backwards to show a weird symbol. It was a swirl with, in the middle, a black 5-pointed star with little black triangle in the gaps between each point, all in a gray circle. What's that? Naruto asked. That, young master, is your clan symbol. Wear it with pride. Naruto stared at it curiously. He had a clan symbol. Cool. He took the coat and put it on, leaving it open at the front. Keiko clapped her hands together and said, it's perfect. Kenjiro, however, shook his head, and Nobu looked a bit nervous at that. "Something's missing," he said. Nobu looked at Naruto and asked, "What?" Kenjiro, with a grin, reached into his pouch and pulled out a forehead protector, with the demon village's symbol on it, and handed it to Naruto. "This," he said. Naruto took it eagerly and was about to tie it onto his head when he paused. And then wrapped it around his neck, thinking that that would look better. Keiko seemed to agree, as she nodded. Kenjiro smiled and said, "You'll make a good Chaldea. Come, you need to meet your team. They know they're getting a new member, and they want to meet you, and it's about time you met them." Naruto nodded eagerly, and Kenjiro led them back to the training field. Next to the big rock, Naruto spotted 3 figures, 2 female and 1 male. The male and the shortest female were about the same age as Naruto, but the other woman was about 26 years of age. This woman turned to them as they approached. She greeted Kenjiro and Keiko and then turned to Naruto, an eyebrow raised. "So this is the Uzumaki you were talking about. He looks promising. I'm Dakini Kometo, I'll be your teacher." She had hazel eyes with angled eyebrows, but you couldn't see the bottom half of her face as it was hidden by a white mask, like Keiko. She had her forehead protector on her head, keeping back her blonde hair, but some of the fringe framed her thin face. The rest of her waist-length hair was tied in a plait. She wore a top similar to Keiko's, but a light blue color, and Naruto could see the Chaldea badge on it, near the neck. Her stomach was covered in bandages, and she had a blue belt about her waist. Like Keiko, she had 2 pieces of material at the front and back of her legs, but Kometo's was blue and only went to mid-thigh. She wore the kunai pouch on her left leg, and her legs were covered in tight-fitting green trousers. She wore shin guards and wore the traditional ninja sandals. Most of her arms were left bare, but she wore a spiked guard on her lower arms, that went to cover the back of her hand. She gestured to the girl. "This is Taraka Kichiro." The said girl had emerald green eyes, a long pointed nose and a small mouth. Her jet black hair was tied in a low ponytail at the neck and ran down to the middle of her back. Her fringe was messy and framed her small face, with a small bit wrapped in white string at her left ear. She wore a choker on her neck, with the collar to her t-shirt just underneath it, just making it visible. The t-shirt was white, and ended with an upside-down V at her stomach, leaving her stomach bare. The sleeves stopped just short of the shoulder. On the left arm, near the sleeve, she wore a small band with braiding and feathers on it. On both arms, she wore an elbow guard, with her lower arm wrapped in a light blue material, and on her hands, she wore Junin gloves. She wore a belt with a white mini skirt. She wore the kunai pouch on her left leg, and she wore plain leather boots that ended mid-thigh. Naruto saw she had a Chaldea badge on her collar. Kichiro looked Naruto up and down and said, "You look nice. Pleased to meet you." Kometo then gestured to the boy. "This is Asura Kuro." The boy had mud-colored brown hair, with deep brown eyes. His brown eyes showed that he had a violent personality, so Naruto made a mental note not to cross this guy. The boy had a pointed nose and a sneering mouth, along with a pointed chin. His messy brown hair was cut short, just a little shorter than Naruto's. He wore a simple gray t-shirt, with a zip running down the front. He wore a brown jacket over the top, open at the front. He wore a plain belt and black trousers with the kunai pouch on the left thigh and the traditional ninja sandals. He also had a chain hanging from the pocket on the right side of his trousers. Kuro's Chaldea badge was on his jacket, near the collar. "Yep," thought Naruto, "not a guy to cross." Kuro scowled at him, but said nothing. Kometo looked at Kuro and scowled at him. The boy didn't take notice and busied himself with brushing imaginary dust off his clothes. Kichiro giggled and Kuro glared at her. Kenjiro patted Naruto on the shoulder. "Well, Keiko and me need to go and train. You'll meet my other 2 students later, but for now, stay with them, okay?" Naruto looked at Kuro and nodded. The 2 walked off, talking quietly to each other. Kometo motioned for them to sit down. Naruto sat next to Kichiro, as she seemed nice, not like the pompous Kuro. "Naruto, tell us about yourself." Naruto put an elbow on his knee and leant his chin in his hand, sighing. "I come from the good-for-nothing village Konoha. I like ramen and I'm going to prove to those Konoha bastards that I am not a demon." Kuro looked at him, a puzzled frown on his face. "What do you mean, Prove you're not a demon. You're a host. All you do is carry it about. Tell that to Konoha. They thought I was Kyuubi no Yoko. They wanted to kill me, to get rid of the demon. They beat me when I was little and never let any of the children play with me. Kichiro gasped and then hugged Naruto, surprising him. When she looked go, she patted his cheek and said, "Don't worry, you'll be treated the opposite here." Naruto shrugged and said, "Well, I hope so." She smiled a sweet smile at him, which made her look younger than she really was. Kuro looked from Naruto to Kichiro and then said, "You gonna beat them up?" "Well, there are a few I want to. Especially Uchiha Sasuke, a branch clan." Naruto nodded, grinning, thinking about the Uchiha's reaction to the fact that he was stronger than him. Yes, he would prove them wrong. Kuro grinned a wicked grin. "Want help? I love beating people up, and I should have the right, you being my teammate." Naruto nodded. He had to rethink his previous view of this boy. He seemed the violent type, but seemed loyal to his teammates. They sat there talking until the sun went down and Kometo dismissed them. Kichiro and Kuro walked off in one direction, while Kometo led Naruto to the Desdemona compound. As they walked, she asked, "What do you think?" "Well, they seem all right, but it's too soon to make judgments." Kometo nodded in approval and said, "Tomorrow, I will start your training. The other two will have a day off. In the morning, you are to be trained by me, and then the afternoon, you are Hiraku's student. He needs to teach you that bloodline limit of yours." They eventually reached the Desdemona compound, to find Naomi waiting outside. Kometo, without a word, handed Naruto over and walked off. Naomi took his hand and led him inside. "Come on out of the cold, you must be hungry, I'll get you something to eat." "How was your day? I love your new look, you look so handsome in it." Naruto suppressed a grin and told her about his day as they sat in the kitchen. Keiko came in and listened to him as he told Naomi about Kuro and Kichiro. When he had finished, Naomi excused herself, saying she had chores to do. Keiko, sitting opposite Naruto, asked, "Do you prefer it here to Konoha?" Naruto nodded and said, "They treated me like shit there. Here, people see me, not Kyuubi. They obviously do not understand the burden we carry." Naruto nodded. He looked at Kiko's Chaldea badge on her collar and asked, "How do you become a Chaldea?" "Not easy. First, you have to be a host, and then you have to train a lot." "Chaldea are hosts?" "Yes. Kenjiro is host of Morphran, the psychic demon. Kometo is the host of Dakini, the water demon. Kuro is host of Asura. The earth demon, and Kichiro I host of Taraka, the wind demon." Naruto frowned and asked, "Why do all of your names start with K and end with O? And why are your last names the names of your demons?" Keiko chuckled and replied, "As for our first names, it's tradition, as you were raised outside this village, so you didn't know of the tradition. Our last names, well, mine comes from the clan, which was named after the demon, but for the others, it's different. When one becomes a demon host, they get their last name changed to the one of the demon. We've decided to keep yours the same as you were in Uzumaki, and I think you want to keep it that way, don't you?" Naruto nodded, thinking about the two traditions. What did they symbolize exactly? Keiko yawned and said, "I'm going to bed, you should too." Naruto nodded, got up and followed his relative to the sleeping rooms. Naruto opened his room and went inside, seeing that Naomi had got new, casual clothes for him. Along with new underwear. He smiled, she was so motherly. He out the clothes in the drawers and got ready for bed. As he climbed into bed, he couldn't help to wonder about the next few years. Uzumaki bloodline limit for those who are interested. Gur Metsuki gray eyes. The iris of the eye turns gray while the pupil looks like a five-pointed star with little black triangles in the gaps between each point. Closing parenthesis. Abilities of the Gur Metsuki include see-through objects, copy jutsus with great accuracy, increased speed, same as when Naruto starts to draw on Kyuubi's chakra. Closing parenthesis. Increased strength, similar to Tsunade's. Predict enemies' attacks accurately. Read enemy thoughts. Able to disrupt chakra control, including other bloodline limits. Able to see the chakra system. See the heat spectrum. Can dispel all levels of genjutsus. Dansu Sono Aki Byoku, dance of the demon tail. surrounds the user in a sphere of chakra, a form of absolute defense. Similar to Neji's Kaden, but far stronger, and there is no need for the user to spin in order to repel attacks. Dansu Kyubi no Yoko Dance of the Nine Tails. Forms a circle of chakra around the user T. Hat then develops into 9 chakra tails that protects the user. Can also be used as an offense if surrounded by enemies. The chakra acts on its own and user has little control over it. Naruto's version of Dansu Sono Aki Byoku, Sutoringusu, allows user to produce thick chakra strings that are used as a defense. One from each hand, can be used to cut through attacks, even thin chakra. Strings that are impervious to all other attacks. Mainly defensive, but Naruto is able to use it offensively by stretching and changing the chakra string's shape. Ni Doru, user sends out penetrating chakra needles. If hit in the right spot, can prevent chakra flow. Offensive. Naruto stuffed the ramen into his mouth. He was hungry. Keiko sat opposite him, commentating on his table manners while he shrugged it off. Saying that no one was perfect. Naruto finished quickly and pushed the bowl away from him, and sighed contently. Keiko was still only halfway through her bowl. She glared at him and asked, "How the hell can you eat so fast?" Naruto shrugged and replied, "I like ramen." Keiko sniffed disdainfully and continued to eat her breakfast. He stood up and walked out of the kitchen. Since Naomi told him that as soon as breakfast was finished, he was to go to the training room, since Kometo and Kenjiro wanted to see him there. He yawned as he walked to the training room, only just managing to keep himself from getting lost. He eventually found it and slid open the door to find Kometo and Kenjiro sitting in the middle of the floor, talking. When he entered, they looked up at him and motioned for him to shut the door and for him to sit next to them. He shut the door, and sat where he was told to. Kenjiro looked at him and asked, "Have you ever talked to the Kyuubi before?" Naruto shook his head. Kenjiro nodded. He then told Naruto to show them the seal that held Kyuubi. Naruto lifted his vest to show them his stomach. Kenjiro frowned and asked, "Is that where the seal is?" "Yeah, but it only shows when I gather chakra." "Do that then." Naruto gathered his chakra and watched as the seal became visible on his stomach. Kenjiro examined it closely. After a while, he nodded and told Naruto to stop gathering chakra. The seal disappeared after a few seconds, and Naruto pulled his vest back down. Kenjiro was looking at the ceiling thoughtfully, while Kometo and Naruto waited impatiently for the older man to answer. Eventually, Kenjiro looked at Naruto and ordered, "Close your eyes." Naruto blinked, but obeyed, knowing better than to argue. Kenjiro then put his hands on Naruto's head, and Naruto could feel the power of the man's chakra. For a while, he sat there with Kenjiro's hands on his head, his eyes closed. And then Kenjiro's voice cut through to him. "You can open your eyes now, Naruto." Naruto slowly opened his eyes, expecting to be in the training room with Kometo and Kenjiro in front of him, but what he saw shocked him. He was in a sewer. He looked wildly around, wondering how he had got there. "Where am I?" he thought. The words reverberated around him. That confused him. Then, beside him, he could feel chakra building. He looked at the source and saw that Kenjiro was standing there. The man looked about and then at Naruto. "Interesting," was all he said. Naruto felt very confused and asked, "Kenjiro-sensei, where are we?" "In your mind. I wish to talk to Kyuubi." Naruto looked about and asked, "This is my mind." Kenjiro nodded and walked off, Naruto following him closely, not wanting to get lost in his own mind. Then he felt it. It was chakra, but it was not normal chakra. This had an evil feeling to it, and a bloodlust that felt as if it can never be satisfied. It made Naruto shiver. Kenjiro scared him by leading him towards this chakra. It began to get stronger, making Naruto shiver even more. Then, the corridor opened up into a large room, that to Naruto's surprise had bars that lead into a cell, but the bars were spaced so that either Naruto or Kenjiro could easily slide through them. What caught Naruto's attention was that on the center bar was a seal, obviously keeping the prisoner inside. He stared at the bars, unsure of what to do. "What is that?" he asked Kenjiro, pointing at the bars. "That, Naruto, is where Kyuubi is sealed." Suddenly, behind the bars, 2 red slitted eyes opened and glared at them. "What do you want?" asked a thunderous voice. Naruto jumped and then felt the eyes focus on him. "What do you want?" Kit, you haven't talked to me in the 12 years that I've been here, why are you here now? Don't ask me, ask Kenjiro-sensei, he brought me here. The evil eyes then looked at Kenjiro, who looked unaffected, in fact. As soon as Kyubi looked at him, Kenjiro bowed deeply. The fox was silent for a while and then asked, Morphran, what business do you have here? Kenjiro glanced at Naruto and then replied, your host is no longer in Konoha, but in the demon village. And I wanted to see how this seal worked. Demon village, That's good. This seal is nothing special, why do you want to look at it? Are you able to talk to Naruto? No, this is the first time, why? Would you like the freedom to talk to him whenever you wanted? I can alter the seal. Interesting, go on. You will also be able to see what is going on through Naruto's eyes. Silence. The eyes closed and the fox said, do what you wish. Kenjiro nodded and turned to Naruto and said, there would be advantages to Kyubi talking to you. I shall alter the seal. From what I can see, Kyubi's chakra can get out, but not him. A very interesting seal indeed. Without waiting for Naruto to answer, he walked towards the bars. He held up a hand, which started to glow with purple chakra. He then did some hand seals and whispered something that Naruto couldn't hear and placed his glowing hand on the seal. Suddenly, the ground beneath Naruto started to shake and Naruto lost his balance, falling heavily to the ground. Kenjiro didn't seem affected by the shaking. Eyes opened again and he was watching as Kenjiro altered the seal. As soon as Kenjiro's hand left the seal, the shaking stopped. Naruto found that when he tried to stand up, he couldn't. Jiro walked up to him and knelt beside him. Come on Naruto, we're going now. And with that, Naruto could feel himself returning to his body. His eyes snapped open as Kenjiro took his hands off Naruto's head. Naruto felt as if he was extremely weak. He shuddered and felt himself fall backwards onto the floor. He closed his eyes, breathing deep. You're weak, you know that. Naruto umped at the sound of that voice inside his head. He scowled as he realized that it was Kyubi, and decided to ignore the fox. He opened his eyes and slowly sat back up. He saw that Kenjiro's shoulders were slumped. While Kometo looked worried. What did you do? She asked Kenjiro. I altered the seal that held Kyubi, so now he can talk to Naruto whenever he wants. He replied. Naruto wiped some sweat off his forehead and asked, why did you do that? You will need his advice at times, so be polite. It's a useful thing to have. The rest of us have that. Naruto thought about it, it would be helpful. But didn't that mean that the fox could read his thoughts? Yes. Kometo sighed and stood up, muttering something about getting them some tea, and walked out. Kenjiro took a little pill out of pouch and handed it to Naruto. This will restore your strength. Naruto took it gratefully and ate it, feeling his strength return. Kenjiro also took one and he shook his head. They were silent for a while and Naruto asked, what's gonna happen to me? Kenjiro looked at him and answered, you will stay here and become a Chaldea. From Hiraku, you will perfect that bloodline limit of yours. Naruto nodded, and was about to ask something else when Kometo walked in through the door with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Naruto and the other to Kenjiro. Naruto took it and drank quickly, wanting to get on with training. After they had finished, Kenjiro took Naruto's cup and left without a word. Kometo sighed and then said to Naruto, I need to know what level you are at, so that I can start your training at an appropriate level. So, what can you do? I can do all the basics. Naruto said slowly, thinking. He wasn't going to mention his Oroku no Jutsu, sexy technique. He then remembered the new technique that he had learned before he was discovered by Iruka. Oh, and the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Kometo blinked and said, that's a high-level Junin technique. Naruto shrugged. It was in the Forbidden Scroll in Konoha. I nicked it and learned it. Kometo stared thoughtfully at Naruto and then said, I'm not sure what level you are, but let me test your agility and dodging skills. She then ordered him to stand up. She then took out some kunai. Dodge these. What if I get hit? That will be bad, since it means that you can't dodge. Then, without warning, she threw several kunai, which Naruto easily dodged. She threw more, evidently intent on making him into a living pincushion, which Naruto was determined not to be. In the end, he did manage to dodge them, some extremely narrow misses, but he still dodged them. Kometo frowned and said, "Your movements are a little jerky. I think we'll start by improving your grace." "How do we do that?" Naruto asked. "Dancing." "Oh, what? Dancing. It will improve your grace. It worked on Kuro and Kichiro, so it should on you." Naruto groaned. He didn't like dancing. "Be quiet. Think of it as training, then it won't be so bad," she said, and Naruto could tell that she was silently laughing, and he crossed his arms stubbornly. She chuckled, and then got into a dance posture. "Now, follow my movements. We shall go slowly at first, but speed will come with time." Naruto sighed and copied her posture. He then watched her, as she went from one posture to another, and he awkwardly copied her, never being much of a dancer. He noticed that the movements were supposed to move easily from one posture to another. Eventually, he began to get the idea, and he became a bit better, though he still didn't like it. Around lunchtime, she stopped and told Naruto to go eat something, and then go and talk to Hiraku for his training in the afternoon. Naruto exited, breathing a sigh of relief. He didn't like that, even if it is training. He went into the kitchen and saw that Masaru was there, eating a simple bowl of rice. Naomi looked up at him and smiled. "Hungry, dear?" Naruto nodded and sat next to Masaru. The boy looked at him and said, "I like your new clothes." "Thank you." The younger boy grinned at him and asked, "How was your training this morning?" Naruto shrugged and said, "I hate dancing, but she said that it would improve my grace. You know, I wish you would find something better to do with your time rather than complaining all the time." "Oh, be quiet." Naruto snapped the thought at the fox and was glad when it didn't answer. The boy giggled and said, "It also helps with taijutsu. You're seeing father after you've eaten, right?" Naruto nodded and thanked Naomi when she placed a bowl of rice in front of him. He ate quickly as he was hungry, though he didn't eat as fast as Masaru. "Geez." And Keiko complained about him. When Naruto finished, he decided to go looking for Hiraku. He walked out of the kitchen, turned the corner and managed to bump into the head clan member. "You should really watch where you're going, Naruto." Naruto grinned and rubbed his head, saying, "Sorry, I guess I'm a little out of it." "A little, isn't that an understatement?" Hiraku grinned down at him and asked, "When are you free today?" "Now, Kometo-sensei said to look for you after I had eaten." "Oh, good. I was wondering when I could start to train you. Follow me." The man then started to walk down the corridor, with Naruto close behind him. "I'm taking you to the local forest. I want you to do the tree climbing exercise." "What will that do?" "It will improve your chakra control, which you need to do that bloodline of yours." Naruto shrugged and said, "I was never taught much in Konoha. They mostly ignored me, so I missed out on a lot." "I know," Hiraku replied coldly, "though at Konoha. Not at Naruto himself." Naruto then remembered something in his history class. Wasn't the demon village allies with Konoha? Why did you break the alliance? Hiraku was silent and replied, "We were." "That is true, and the reason we broke the alliance was because we thought that your clan had been wiped out. Your clan is precious to the demon village, and I'm glad that you're alive. And I'm honored to train you as well." Naruto was silent and then realized that they were no longer in the Desdemona compound, but on the edge of a forest. He was so caught up in the conversation that he hadn't even noticed the change in his surroundings. "You're so blind, you know that." Naruto's eyebrow twitched in annoyance. The constant commentary of the demon was starting to annoy him. "Not as much as you annoy me. Will you just shut up?" Again, the fox didn't answer and Naruto sighed a sigh of relief. Hiraku led Naruto into the forest and stopped about 10 meters in. At the base of a particular large tree, Hiraku turned to Naruto, brushing a little dirt off his white kimono sleeve and looked at him with his gray eyes. "I want you to focus your chakra into your feet. Think of doing nothing else, clear your mind." Naruto closed his eyes and focused his chakra into his feet. He opened his eyes and looked expectantly at Hiraku. He grinned at him and said, "You wouldn't be able to walk up the tree at first, so try running at it and up it as well. Use a kunai to mark where you got up to, and then try again." Naruto nodded and looked at the tree. He then ran up to, placing his feet on the trunk. He got up about 10 feet when his foot slipped. He lashed out with the kunai, marking the spot, and then he fell, luckily landing on his feet. He looked up the tree in annoyance. Hiraku came up to him and looked at the mark, 10 feet up the tree. That was an excellent first try. Even I couldn't go up that far on my first try. You're going to be a good ninja, he said, smiling warmly at Naruto, while ruffling the young blonde's hair. Naruto jumped at the praise, startled. No one had ever done that. Hiraku noticed his startled expression and asked, "What's wrong, boy? No one has ever said anything like that before." Hiraku smiled in understanding and said, "Try again." Naruto nodded eagerly and stood up. He gathered chakra into his feet and ran at the tree, this time managed to beat the other scratch by 2 feet. When he landed back on the ground, he looked up at the 30-foot tree. This was going to be a long day. At sundown, Hiraku called a stop to the training. Naruto flumped on the ground, too tired to start to the walk back yet. Hiraku sat next to him and handed him a rice ball, which he graciously took and ate. After he had eaten, he looked up at the last mark he had made, about 20 feet up the tree. He would finish the exercise tomorrow, he thought with some pride. Don't get too overconfident, you're just the same tiny brat to me. Naruto's eyebrow twitched and he snapped at the old fox. I hate you. A few seconds of silence and then, no you don't, you're just saying that to make me feel better. Naruto muttered something about stupid foxes, but didn't say anything else. Hiraku watched with an amused expression and then stood up. He placed a hand under Naruto's elbow and helped him to his feet. Naruto thanked him and tried to steady himself, but in failing that, Hiraku silently let the boy lean on him. Let's go home, Hiraku said. Naruto smiled. He liked that word now. In Konoha, it had no meaning to him, but here he could finally understand the true meaning of the word. Yes, I'm hungry, he said. Hiraku suddenly laughed, patting Naruto on the back, causing him to lose his balance and almost fall flat on his face. Hiraku steadied him and said, "You're a treasure, you know that." Hiraku sighed. He then took a sip of his tea, looking at the group of ninja at the other side of the room. Keiko, his son Masaru, Naruto, Kichiro and Kuro were there, playing some card game. Naruto had really settled down. It had been a week since he had come and he had slowly opened up to them. He was very smart, a prankster and had very mature moments that were far beyond his years. Hiraku sighed. Naruto had complete the tree climbing exercise and Hiraku had started him on the water walking, which he was learning just as quickly. Hiraku turned his head sidewards as Kometo sat next to him, eyeing the group. She looked in particular at Naruto. How far in his training have you gone? She asked. Hiraku chuckled and said, he's already completed the tree climbing exercise and he's almost completed the water walking exercise. He chuckled as one of her eyebrows shot up in surprise. She then sighed and said, he's also a very good dancer. Though he hates it, he's very good. Hiraku nodded and said, he's a genius. Better than I was at that age, and I was considered a prodigy. They were silent for a while and then Kometo said, I heard that you've called for a clan head meeting. Why? Well, Naruto's an Uzumaki. If I keep him a secret from the other clans, there would be big trouble, especially as he is living in the Desdemona house. Kometo frowned. I didn't think of that. Didn't think you had. When are you giving Naruto the Uzumaki house here in the demon village? Hiraku sighed, thinking and then said, not now, he is too young to live by himself. I think when he is either 16 or 18. Depends on how much he grows. But, yes, he will get it. Kometo nodded, agreeing with him. Hiraku drained the last of his tea and stood up. Over at the group, Naruto cried cheater. At Kuro, who was laughing as he waved some cards in Naruto's face. Hiraku approached the group and said, children, calm down. Naruto, we need to go. Naruto looked at him. His lower lip stuck out in a pout and he then glared at Kuro, before putting his cards down and following Hiraku out of the door. Hiraku chuckled as they exited the compound, receiving a sulky look from the blonde. Don't like losing? Hiraku asked. No, he cheated, it isn't fair. Life's not fair. Naruto's eyes went flat and he said, I never has been for me. Hiraku sighed and put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. The boy looked up at him. I know. Look, we're going to a meeting of the clan heads in the village. Why? Naruto asked, confused. Well, I'll be killed by them by keeping your existence secret. Naruto frowned until he remembered who he was. He then turned to Hiraku and asked, "Does that mean I'm the head of my clan?" Hiraku blinked and looked closely at Naruto. "Well, I suppose you're right. I never thought of that." Naruto cocked his head, grinned and then said, "Cool." Hiraku chuckled and continued to lead Naruto to the center of the village. It was mid-morning, so many people were up, many greeting Hiraku as he passed, often inquiring how Keiko was. Many of them looked at Naruto and smiled at him, which he returned. They seemed a nice group of people. Well, on the outside, Hiraku led Naruto to a building that stood opposite the Akikage. It was slightly smaller than the Akikage Tower, but bigger than all the other buildings. It had double wooden doors for the entrance. The building was made of a deep red brick with the occasional black beam of wood exposed to the outside. The roof of the building was made out of a stone that perfectly matched the color of the bricks. Hiraku saw Naruto looking at the building with interest. He chuckled and said, "This is the council house. We meet here when there are urgent matters at hand, but today, you are to meet your fellow clan heads." Naruto grinned and nodded. They entered the building into a medium-sized room. The only thing that was in there was a woman at a clerk desk reading some papers. Behind her were various cabinets that contained important matters that were discussed within the council. Hiraku nodded at the two guards that stood either side of the door. He approached the woman at the desk and tapped it to get her attention. She raised her head and blinked at them. She recognized Hiraku and smiled at him and then asked, "What important matter are you here for?" "Hiraku-sama." He smiled and pointed at Naruto, who had his back turned to them as he inspected a picture of the world, his clan symbol clearly visible to the woman. She gasped and looked at Hiraku wide-eyed. He nodded in response and then said, "Naruto, come." The blonde boy looked at them with his bright blue eyes and sighed. Hiraku chuckled and led I am through the door behind the woman, which led into a long corridor. They reached the end and entered the door. The room inside was large. It had a long table with 6 seats stationed around it. On each chair, there was the clan symbol, and Hiraku recognized Naruto's in the chair nearest the head seat, which had remained unoccupied for 12 years. In the head seat sat an elderly man, writing something in a book and grumbling to himself. On the walls hung various wall hangings that pictured demons and the like. Hiraku spotted Naruto looking at them in interest, and then the blonde's eyes settled on the old man. Hiraku cleared his throat and the old man looked up, annoyed, which turned to one of recognition. "Hiraku, you're finally here, are you? What was this matter of deep importance you wanted to talk about?" "And who's the boy?" he said, seeing the blonde boy, who sighed in annoyance. Hiraku walked up to the old man and stood next to the Uzumaki seat, staring at it. "This seat has been empty for 12 years, hasn't it?" The old man looked surprised and then slowly nodded. "Yes, it has. But why say that now?" Hiraku looked at Naruto, who was staring at the old man in interest, and chuckled. "The boy is the reason I'm here." "Oh, why?" Hiraku cocked his head and said, "His name is Uzumaki Naruto." The old man, who was about to take a sip of water, shocked and stared at Hiraku and shook. He then turned to look at Naruto, who looked annoyed at the man's reaction. The man stood up and stuck his hand put to Naruto. "I'm so happy to see you, Naruto-sama. Please, take your seat," indicating the seat with Naruto's clan symbol on it. The boy grinned his infectious grin and sat down, taking the cup of water the old man offered. Hiraku sat down in his chair, which had his clan symbol on. His symbol was a golden eye that had 8 tails swirling out of it. The old man looked at Hiraku and asked, "How long has Naruto-sama been here?" "A week. He's been training with me and Kometo." The old man nodded, but didn't say anything. Just then, the door opened. Hiraku turned his head to the door to see a head clan member, Ito Toshiro. He was a handsome young man in his early 20s. He had his black hair tied in a low ponytail, keeping it out of the way. His black eyes seemed to take in everything in the surroundings, and showed that he was of an intelligent mind. He wore a simple white kimono. He looked around the room, and smiled when he spotted Hiraku. He then walked up to Hiraku and bowed towards the old man in the head seat, who nodded. The man, Toshiro, looked at Naruto with interest. Hiraku cleared his throat and told the young man to sit down. Toshiro sighed and sat in the seat next to Naruto, who was studying the young man with similar interest. Hiraku watched the pair. They would get along well, he thought, just as the 3 remaining clan heads came in and sat in their respective places. Hiraku looked at them. Fuji Susumu was not a man to cross. Not only was he big and covered with scars, he had a short temper and was known to punch people through thick concrete walls. He then looked at Sato Yoshi, a tall thin man with gray hair and bright green eyes. His clan were poison experts, so Hiraku was always careful when dealing with the Sly clan. Yoshi was the father of Kiko's teammates. Then there was Kobayashi Arata. He wore a full-length cloak with a hood that shadowed his face, so no one could see it. They were a new major clan in the village, so Hiraku knew nothing about them. But Arata seemed to know everything about all the other clans. When Hiraku asked the man how he knew, Arata simply said, "It is nothing but an insight of the mind." That, of course, made no sense to Hiraku. So he avoided the man. He was also pleased to note that Toshiro, Susumu and Yoshi also avoided the man. He then turned his attention to the council when the old man stood up. The man had no name. And if he did, he chose not to tell them. The old man cleared his throat and said, "Today, this council has been called by Hiraku. It is a matter of deep importance." Yeah, just tell me why this kid is here," Susumu said in a deep bass voice. Naruto glared at the man, and Hiraku noticed that the boy's eyes turned gray momentarily before turning back to their normal deep blue. Hiraku blinked and then glared at Susumu. The old man scowled and said coldly, "I was getting to that." Susumu blinked and then glared back before averting his eyes. The old man snorted and said, "I have the honor of introducing Uzumaki Naruto. He has recently come from Konoha to come stay in this village, his rightful village." There was silence in the council room as the other head clan members stared at Naruto, who returned their gaze calmly. Then Toshiro gave a gleeful shout and grabbed Naruto's hand saying, "I'm so glad to meet you, Naruto-kun. I'm Ito Toshiro, head of the Ito clan." He grinned at Naruto, who returned the grin. Hiraku smiled. Yes, the two would get along. Susumu cleared his throat and said, "My name is Fuji Susumu, head of the Fuji clan." His voice had lost the hostility. Hiraku knew that the man was close to the previous Uzumaki head clan member, and knew the Uzumaki clan well. Sato Yoshi's lip twitched and he said, "I am Sato Yoshi, head of the Sato clan. Nice to meet you." Kobayashi Arata sat there, seemingly to look at Naruto. The figure then said, "Uzumaki Naruto, you host the Kyubi no Yoko, don't you? I am Kobayashi Arata. I have seen you before in Konoha. I'm surprised you stayed there for as long as you did. One word and we would have come and got you, Hiraku stared at the man, so did everyone else. The man was known not to put two words together, let alone sentences, and here he had done a whole speech. Well, to Arata it was one. Hiraku looked at Naruto, who looked confused and then shrugged. The old man coughed, returning the council's attention to him. Well, yes, Uzumaki Naruto is indeed the host of Kyubi. He is to be trained as a Chaldea, as well as being a head clan member. Yoshi grunted and looked out of the wide window at the sun, which was now telling them that it was mid-afternoon. Hiraku cleared his throat and said, He is staying in my house for the moment and he is training with Kometo as a Chaldea. The other four did not seem surprised at this, in fact Toshiro and Susumu nodded slightly. Susumu looked at Naruto and said quietly, I'm glad that your clan has not died, boy. Train well. He then stood up and walked out of the door. Yoshi sighed, but followed the man's example. Toshiro rolled his eyes. He turned to Naruto and said, Well, I better be off now. Lots to do. We'll have a nice meal when we next meet. Until then Naruto-kun, farewell. He stood up, grinning like an idiot and quickly walked out of the door. Arata sat there in silence, his arms crossed in the table. He turned the hood at Naruto. He didn't say anything, but stood and left. Naruto, when the man had left, turned to Hiraku and said, That guy gives me the creeps. Hiraku laughed and replied he does that to everyone. Strange man, strange clan. All mystics if you ask me, never can get a straight answer from any of them. Well, we have to go old man. See you soon. You too Hiraku-sama, Naruto-sama. Naruto waved at the old man and followed Hiraku out of the council chamber. As they exited the building, Naruto said, They seemed happy. Of course they are. You are the remainder member of a very powerful clan, both in strength and influence. Don't underestimate your power, he said, clapping Naruto on the shoulder and disappearing. Naruto watched the man and snorted. Naruto-chan. He turned around only to be caught in one of Kichiro's hug. She called him either Naru-to-chan or Aniki. She had no blood brothers, being an only child. So she thought of Naruto and Kuro as her brothers. They in turn thought of her as a sister. Kuro yawned as he approached, just as Kichiro let go of Naruto. Naruto grinned at them. Kuro snorted and asked, "Where did Hiraku take you?" "To the council meeting. I'm the head of my clan, even though I am the only member of it." Kichiro nudged Naruto in the ribs and winked at him, saying, "I'm sure me and Kuro will help you find a willing pretty lady to help you rebuild the clan." She then laughed as she saw that Naruto had a slight blush. Kuro sighed as he looked at the now setting sun. "We should get back, it's getting late. See ya tomorrow," he said, waving to them as he walked away. Kichiro gave Naruto one last hug before dashing off as well. Naruto stared at their retreating backs before heading back to the Desdemona's house. When he got back, he had a quick supper and went to bed, tired after the long day. He smiled. It was so much better than Konoha. The other head clan members treated him with respect as well. Well, Naruto wasn't too sure about Arata. He shivered, a very strange man. He thought as he drifted off into a dreamless sleep. Hatake Kakashi sighed as he watched his genin team walk into the Hokage Tower to receive a new mission. When they got there, the Hokage was reading a piece of paper with a frown. When he finally noticed Kakashi, Sasuke, Sakura and Ryo, he smiled at them. He put down the piece of paper and handed Kakashi a piece of paper with the detail of a D-rank mission. Kakashi fought the urge to sigh and put the piece of paper in his pocket. His genin team walked out in silence. Kakashi was silently annoyed at them. He had an immature prankster, an avenger and a girl that was too interested in her love life. Kakashi stopped as the voice of Hokage came to him. He turned around to look at the old man, who had picked up the piece of paper again. His genin team froze, looking back at the Hokage, who waved them out. The Hokage watched them close the door and then turned his gaze to Kakashi. The old man sighed and said, "The hidden village of the demon have reopened their communication with us." Kakashi blinked, surprised. After the Uzumaki clan was wiped out, the demon village had totally shut off from Konoha. The Hokage then frowned and said, "They have asked for one of their genin teams to participate in the Chunin exams in 6 months' time. I will be telling them that they may, but when they arrive, keep a close eye on them. You understand?" Kakashi nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The Hokage smiled and dismissed him. He went out of the door and found Ryo standing there, looking guilty. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. "Listening were we?" The boy rubbed his head and said, "I was bored and Sakura's running after Uchiha for a date. Can I help you?" Kakashi blinked and then chuckled and said, "No, it is my mission, not for you young genins. Beside, how can you help me when you're doing the exam?" Ryo stared at him, his mouth slightly open. Kakashi put his finger on the side of his nose, indicating a secret. Ryo grinned and nodded, then turned and ran off. Kakashi sighed, thinking whether he had made the right decision. "Okay, Naruto-kun, I won. You to move this rock and let this stream flow down into the small lake below." Naruto looked at the rock that Hiraku had told him to move. It was impossible. The rock was huge. It was currently blocking a small stream. He looked down the small cliff they were stood on. If the rock was not there, then the stream would flow over the cliff and into the small lake, which had another stream flowing away from it. There was a small clearing around the lake, but the clearing ended with the dense pine forest. From where he stood, Naruto could just make out a cave in the cliff, near the lake. It would make a good training area, he decided. He then turned to glare at the rock. Hiraku smiled at him and said, "I'll return in the evening to see how your training is going." And then promptly disappeared, leaving Naruto alone. He sighed. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the rock and pushed slightly. It did not move. He snorted. Typical for Hiraku to give him an impossible task to complete. He placed 2 hands on the rock and pushed again. He then sighed, taking his hands off. He narrowed his eyes. It would be easier to push the rock off the cliff and into the lake below. He sighed, taking off his leather coat and placing it on the ground beside the stream. He put chakra into his feet and stepped onto the stream's surface. He walked up to the rock, studying it. Hiraku said that it would help him with his bloodline limit. He snorted. He doubted it. He sighed and tried to move the rock again, getting nowhere of course. He kicked the rock out of frustration, but only got a hurt foot in return. He growled, punching the rock, and hurting his hand as well. Baka, shut up will you? Do you want to do this? No, it's not my bloodline. Your ancestors went through the same training as this. Really? Wait, how do you know this? Baka, remember that the Uzumaki clan came from this village, and they don't call it the demon village for nothing you know. Naruto heard the fox, but chose not to reply, concentrating on his training instead. By mid-afternoon, he looked up at the blue sky, at some gray clouds that were gathering on the horizon. There would be a storm later. Naruto sighed and sat down, his back against the rock, thinking. The fox hadn't given him any clues on how to do this exercise, but laughed at him instead, steadily making him angry. He frowned. It was almost time to go and meet Kometo for his daily dancing lesson. He sighed. Oh, how he hated it. His training schedule now was Hiraku in the morning and Kometo in the afternoons. Leaving evenings for relaxing and spending time with his teammates, getting to know each other better. He was about to stand up when he was suddenly drenching in ice-cold water. He yelled and lost control of the chakra that he was using to keep himself on the water surface. With a slash, he fell in, which was, sitting down, chest high on him. Shad. Ao fell on him and he glared up at Kometo, who was grinning and holding a sphere of water in one of her hands. Ha 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 ha, you baka, oh that was so funny. That's going to amuse me for hours. Shut up. Kometo cocked her head and said, I thought that I would pick you up today. He growled and said, you didn't have to do that. Do what? She asked innocently. Naruto ignored her and stood up. Grumbling he went to the shore and picked up his coat, but before he could put it on, Kometo grabbed his arm. He turned to her, an eyebrow raised. She smiled at him and pocked him in the chest. What was? He was cut short when he realized that he was completely dry. He looked at her. How did you do that? I'm not the host of the water demon for nothing you know. She said, letting go of his arm. He frowned. Putting his coat on, she walked away, with him following him back to the Desdemona compound. Kuro and Kichiro were already there, waiting for them. They started with the usual dancing. And then Kometo got them to do some taijutsu moves, which had been made easier by the dancing. After they had finished, Naruto, Kichiro and Kuro went for a walk. After a time, they came to the area that Naruto had been training at earlier. He stopped, glaring at the rock. He went to it and kicked it again, though not hard enough to hurt himself. Kichiro and Kuro exchanged glances, but didn't say anything. Now you've just gone ahead and hurt its feelings. The fox joked. Naruto frowned. Shut up, stupid fox. The fox laughed, but didn't say anything. Kichiro came up to him, looking at the rock and asked, Naruto-chan, why did you kick the poor rock? Because I hate it. It's supposed to be my training. Oh, she then giggled and Naruto glared at her. Kuro snorted and jumped onto the rock, sitting on the very top. He patted it and said, you know, there is really no need to hit it, you know, rocks have feelings too. Kichiro laughed while Naruto's sweat dropped. He glared at the rock and then sat down, placing a foot on the rock and shoving it slightly. Kuro cocked his head at Naruto as Kichiro leaned against the rock, low, oaking out over the cliff at the setting sun. Naruto glanced at it and then looked back at the rock, trying to think up of how to move it. Hiraku had said that Naruto was not allowed to use tools of any kind, only his arms and back. He scowled. How was he meant to do that? Practice. Naruto sighed and flopped on the ground, one foot still resting on the rock. Kichiro sat next to him and pocked him the chest. He waved her hand away absently, still lost in thought. Maybe we could get Kometo-sensei to soak him again. Kuro suggested. Naruto growled and said, shut up. Kichiro giggled and ruffled Naruto's hair. He sat back up, glaring up at the grinning Kuro. You two really know how to annoy someone, you know that. We know. They said. grinning at him as a peal of thunder could be heard. Orochimaru looked at the map that was hanging on the wall, scowling. He had already enlisted the help of Suna and was wondering, could he also get the help of the demon village? They had Chaldea, the most powerful nin in the world, and he wanted them on his side when he came to destroy Konoha. He chuckled. It would be easy, since the demon village hate Konoha for letting the Uzumaki clan die out. The last member being the fourth Hokage, the greatest Uzumaki in history. But he still died an early death. Orochimaru scowled. If that clan was still alive, he would take one as his host. Due to their extremely powerful bloodline limit, there was a step behind him and he sneered. Yes, Kabuto, I was wondering if you've found another village that would help you destroy Konoha. I was thinking, Akigakure. They have a grudge against Konoha for their Uzumaki clan. If one of those clan members were alive, I would be tempted to take one of those, and not Uchiha Sasuke. Whose Sharingan is weak compared to the Gurmetsuki? Kabuto didn't say anything, but pushed his glasses further up his nose. Orochimaru turned to face the younger man and said, we will leave for Akigakure in 3 days. Naruto sighed as he walked along the street. He was headed back home. He was hungry, especially with arguing with Kichiro and Kuro for an hour, and all about a rock. He sighed. A bit silly really, arguing about a rock. He then heard his name being called and turned to see Keiko waving at him from an outside a local shop. He grinned and went over to her, and when he did, he realized that she wasn't alone. She was with 2 boys, about her age, but they looked exactly the same. They wore a plain, black tight leather vest and tie. Black leather trousers with the kunai pouch on their right leg. They wore black leather boots, made for stealth. They also wore a thick dark brown belt. On their lower arms they wore overlapping plates that went to cover the back of their hands. On their heads they wore a V-shaped plate that covered their forehead, with the village symbol on. They then had overlapping plates, like on their arms, down their back, ending at a point at their knees. Around the face they curved slightly, so that the face was framed by the armor, but didn't hinder any movement. But it was their face that caught Naruto's interest. They had narrow, emerald green eyes with slits for the pupils and they had no eyebrows. They had a flat, snake-like nose and a thin mouth. They were also extremely pale. Naruto looked from one to the other, trying to find an identifying difference, but couldn't find one. They were completely identical. Keiko smiled at this and pointed to the right one. This is Rakshasa Kato. She then pointed to the other one. And this is Rakshasa Kataro. They come from the Sato clan and they are my teammates. The twins were looking at Naruto with interest and one of them said. Naruto thought it was Kato. So, you must be Uzumaki Naruto. Pleased to meet you. Naruto blinked. Their voices were quiet, but audible and spoke with many hisses, similar to that of a snake. Naruto then grinned and said, nice to meet you too, I've wanted to meet Kiko's teammates. Their lips twitched into a smile and Kataro, or was it Kato, said, thanks. Naruto grinned at them and then looked at the setting sun, frowning slightly. Just then, his stomach decided to rumble loudly. Keiko raised an eyebrow while the twins laughed at him. He scowled and said, I think I'm hungry. Keiko sighed and slapped her forehead. Come you, let's go home. Naruto grinned and nodded enthusiastically. They said goodbye to the twins and walked home. Naruto turned to Keiko and said, is it just me, or do they remind you of snakes? They are the host of the two-headed snake. It's strange the snake has them both as host. We don't know how that happened, but that's the way it is. Naruto frowned, but let it slide. How's the training? Keiko asked pleasantly, a little too pleasantly. Naruto scowled at her and said, impossible. Keiko laughed softly, but didn't say any more. They had reached home and had a large dinner, and Naruto spent the rest of the evening talking with Keiko and Masaru. For a week, the rock refused to budge, and it didn't help that the demon kept making snide comments. So, Naruto was getting pissed, really pissed. At mid-morning, Naruto suddenly snapped. He hated the rock and everything about it. He swung his fist, closed his eyes and lunged at it, punching it. He had intended to punch it and maybe get a broken hand in return, but nothing of the sort happened. He slowly opened his eyes and blinked in surprise. Where he had punched the rock, there was a huge hole in the rock. He then kicked it and watched, enthralled, as the rock flew off and landed with a giant splash in the lake below. The stream then started to flow off the cliff side and into the lake, forming the waterfall that Hiraku wanted. How on earth? About time. What do you mean by that? Anger. That was the key to unlocking your strength, activating the Gurametsuki. Look at your reflection. Naruto blinked and knelt, looking at his reflection, and gasped. His iris had turned gray with the poopy L, making a star shape with small triangles in between each gap. He stood back up and asked, "So, all I had to do was get angry and destroy the rock?" "Just about," Naruto sighed, rolling his eyes. Why didn't you tell me that in the first place? I didn't want to spoil the surprise. Besides, you're supposed to do this training by yourself. That was quicker than I thought. Naruto jumped at the sound and whirled around and relaxed when he saw Hiraku, who grinned at him. Naruto stepped off the stream and put his coat back on. Hiraku waved for him to follow. As they walked, Hiraku said, "Normally, it would take about a month before they got angry enough. You have issues." Naruto's sweat dropped and said, "No one's perfect." Hiraku chuckled and nodded. "That's true. Tomorrow, I will train you on the use of that eye. But I think you've got the idea of it." Naruto nodded, looking back at the training area. "Come on, I'm hungry," Hiraku said, grinning at Naruto. Naruto laughed and said, "Ramen, here I come." Kenjiro narrowed his eyes. He was on the city walls and looking at two figures approaching the city. He decided to go and meet them. He could tell that they were strong. He hid in an alley near the gates, seeing the two approach the gates. One was extremely pale with gold eyes that had a slit for the pupil. The other was a young man, in his 20s with white hair and glasses. Kenjiro narrowed his eyes. He didn't like the feel of this. The two were stopped by the guards. "What is your business?" The pale one looked at the guard disdainfully and said coldly, "My business is mine, and I will not tell you. You cannot enter until you tell us your intentions. We've come here for trading." "Fine, you can enter." Kenjiro watched as they entered the gates. He let them pass him and then stepped out. "What exactly is your trade? I do not see any valuable items on your person. What is your true business?" The pale man turned with a smirk. "You're good. I wasn't even able to detect you. I don't hold the elite Chaldea rank for nothing." The man nodded and studied him. "What is your name?" Kenjiro asked, impatient. "Ah, please forgive me. I am Orochimaru, and this is my assistant, Kabuto." Kenjiro recognized the name's missing nins. "What do you want?" he asked. "We wish to talk to the Akikage." Kenjiro studied the two men in front of him, thinking. The older, Orochimaru, was one of the three Sannin, known in Akigakure for his experiments on his fellow villagers. He didn't really want to take the man to the Akikage, but he was curious as to what the snake Sannin wanted. He narrowed his eyes, certain that the man would only tell the Akikage. Orochimaru waited calmly, though Kabuto seemed a bit restless. Finally, Kenjiro nodded slowly and said, "Fine, but know this. I will not tolerate it if you do anything suspicious. If you do, I will not hesitate to kill you." "Got that?" Orochimaru smirked and said, "I wouldn't dream of it. Can my assistant explore your glorious village while I talk to the Akikage?" Kenjiro narrowed his eyes, suspicious as to the doings of the pair. He then gave a sharp nod. The young man nodded and walked off. Kenjiro watched Kabuto a moment and cast out his mind. He searched for a particular mind, and found it a few streets away. He entered the man's thoughts and said, "Kazuo." There was a moment's pause, then, "Yes. Look for this man." He sent the image of Kabuto into the other's mind. "He is nearby. Keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't do anything suspicious." "Got that." "Oh, joy. A young man that looks like an old man, looks wimpy as well." "Oh, stop complaining and do as you're told." Hi, I'm going." "Geez, no need to bite my head off." Kenjiro sighed as he withdrew from the younger man's mind. He glared at Orochimaru, who was looking around him at the village. "Follow me," Kenjiro said somewhat coldly. Kenjiro turned around and walked off, Orochimaru following with a scowl. Kenjiro smirked, sensing that the man didn't like being treated like this, and Kenjiro was sure that he never has been treated this way either. He chose the shortest route to the Akikage Tower, not wanting Orochimaru seeing much of his village. He could sense other demon nins watching Orochimaru. Enjiro didn't stop them like he had when he brought Naruto to the village. He wanted this man watched as much as possible. He turned his face to see Orochimaru still scowling, obviously not liking being watched so closely. He glared at Kenjiro. One of Kenjiro's eyebrows shot up. "Want to fight me?" Orochimaru shook his head and said, "No, I have not come here for any conflict, only for negotiating talks." "Really now?" "Yes." Kenjiro didn't answer as they had reached the Akikage Tower. Kenjiro looked over at the clan council house, spotting Naruto's blonde hair at the window. He then led Orochimaru into the tower. They quickly went up the spiral staircase and Kenjiro knocked. The Akikage gave them permission to enter. Kenjiro entered and ushered Orochimaru towards the desk and then positioned himself at the window so he could keep an eye on Orochimaru. The Akikage stared at Orochimaru. "You have some guts coming here, Orochimaru. You are a wanted criminal. I should throw you in prison right now. Maybe have Kenjiro here execute you on the spot." Orochimaru narrowed his eyes, glancing warily at Kenjiro, and said, "I have come here to negotiate. You have my interest. What do you want?" "I want the destruction of Konoha." "And what has that got to do with us?" Orochimaru stared at the Akikage and said slowly, "I thought you would want to in me and get rid of the village that killed the Uzumaki clan." There was silence in the room, broken by the Akikage's laughter. Orochimaru looked a bit pissed at this. "What's so funny?" he demanded. The Akikage waved a hand and said, "We have long since forgotten about that. We are back on speaking terms with them now. In fact, we have a genin team participating in their next Chunin exams." Orochimaru's mouth opened in disbelief, and then he drew himself up and said coldly, "Fine, as you wish. I can see no way to convince you. I shall take my leave then. I shall collect Kabuto and leave." He then stalked out of the room. The Akikage sighed, saying, "I wouldn't have sided with him anyway. I don't trust him. He has a habit of using people for his own amusement." Kenjiro nodded, thinking about what the snake Sanin's lap puppy was doing. Kabuto was currently walking the streets of Akigakure, waiting for Orochimaru to finish what he was doing. He was aware of someone watching him. Although the person hid their chakra extremely well, he had been walking around for a while, and then, because he wasn't paying attention to where he was going, he walked into someone. He glanced at a boy with spiky blonde hair before saying, "Watch it, midget." He walked a couple of steps before a kunai raced past his cheek, cutting it. He whirled around, angry, to see the blonde boy he had bumped into, standing there with several kunai drawn. He had unusually bright blue eyes that were snapping with anger. "Midget, you'll pay for that remark," the boy said quietly as the people around them went silent. Kabuto then heard a couple whispering to each other. "He's our recent Chaldea in training, isn't he? Also, isn't he a head clan member? Yay, that guy is so dead. Chaldea, head clan member. Oh fuck." Then the boy appeared in front of him in a yellow flash and punched him in the face. Kabuto cried out. He felt his nose break as he was thrown back the whole length of the street. When he landed, he groggily lifted his head and blinked bleary eyes. God, the boy was strong. He then saw the boy walk slowly towards him, pausing i.e. fly to break off a length of metal from the fencing around a house. He broke it as easily as a child would pick a flower. As the boy stopped a yard from him, Kabuto could see the boy's eyes. They were no longer a blue color. They had changed to gray eyes with a star for the pupil with black triangles in between the points. This puzzled Kabuto. What bloodline was this? As Kabuto stared at the boy, he had one thought in mind. "I'm screwed, aren't I?" Kenjiro suddenly cocked his head as screams of pain could be heard within the city. He frowned, wondering what was going on. The Akikage cocked his head as he heard the screams as well. "I wonder what's going on," he said, tapping a finger on his chin. Kenjiro nodded and looked closely out of the window. There was suddenly one last, loud blood-curdling shriek and the village fell silent. The Akikage frowned and said, "Kenjiro, go find out what's going on." Kenjiro nodded as was about to leave when the door opened to reveal Kazuo. He was young, in his early 20s. He had slanted bright green eyes, with a medium-sized nose. He had a thin face, framed by spiky mid-back fire red hair. He had a tan, which was visible as he wore a green sleeveless jacket that revealed his well-muscled abdomen and arms. He wore his forehead protector around his waist. He had a white-framed red Egyptian-styled skirt, the kind that men wore. He wore tight green trousers with simple ankle boots. He wore shin guards and Junin gloves. He also wore a Chaldea badge on his jacket. He was currently grinning from ear to ear. Kenjiro raised an eyebrow and asked, "What's made you so happy? And I thought I told you to follow Kabuto." The man took one look at them and collapsed on the floor in hysterics. Akikage and Kenjiro exchanged glances. Kazuo obviously saw something extremely amusing. They haven't seen him laugh this hard in years, the last time being when he had tricked an enemy into jumping into a pool of lava by walking on its surface and making the enemy think that it is an illusion when it was real. But Kazuo is immune to intense heat. Yes, Kazuo was very sadistic. They waited for him to calm down. And he eventually did, standing up wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "There's no need to follow the rat anymore," he managed to gasp out. "Why not?" the Akikage questioned. The idiot made the mistake of insulting our Uzumaki, and well, let's just say that the rat won't be leaving the hospital for a while. I mean, that kid somehow managed to shove a piece of fence up his ass. Oh, God, you should have been there. It was so funny. I promised to buy him a load of ramen later for that. He then promptly started to laugh again. Orochimaru scowled. He couldn't find Kabuto, and not only that, but there were a load of ninjas watching him. He sighed, annoyed. He then caught a bit of a conversation of a group of people he was passing. "Did you hear what happened?" "Why, what happened?" "Someone insulted our recent Chaldea in training." "Really? I heard that he's also a head clan member." "Yeah, I heard that too, and he's staying with the Desdemona clan. I was there when that foreign nin insulted him." Kazuo-sama was pissing himself laughing. "That's not surprising. What did he do?" "Well, this foreign nin called him a midget, and he snapped. Beat the shit out of him with a bit of fencing, and then you know what he did." "What? He shoved it up his ass." The group laughed and one said, "Serves him right. He has no business in our village." Orochimaru scowled. Were they talking about Kabuto? He hoped they weren't. He turned back as he had seen the hospital a few minutes ago. He approached the large building and entered to come into the waiting room. He approached the desk, and as he did so, everyone stared at him. He scowled at them, but they didn't seem to notice. He stopped at the desk and asked the white-haired lady, "Have you recently had a ninja in here?" "White hair with glasses." "Yes, do you wish to see him?" "I think he is conscious at the moment." He nodded and she called, "Yuriko-yoko." AGI. RL entered a door that was behind the desk. "Yes, Jinayame Onichan, would you please escort this gentleman to room 13B? The girl nodded and came out from behind the desk. "Follow me please," she said in a sweet voice. Orochimaru followed the young girl, of about 12 years of age, down several corridors. She had large gray eyes, with an elegant nose and mouth. She had a milky complexion, along with curious white hair that had blue highlights that were visible when light shone on her hair. She had her long hair mid-back length in a ponytail with the tie near the bottom of the tail. 2 pieces of hair coming down to just under her chin framing her pale face. She had a fringe coming to eye level with a long piece that came down the side of her nose. She was wearing a GHT blue scarf with both ends hanging down the front of her body. She wore a loose white tunic, which came down to mid-thigh, with a low-cut collar. She wore tight black leggings and open-toed sandals. As Orochimaru walked along, he saw doctors and nurses with the same hair color, eye color and complexion, so he assumed they were a clan, properly minor. He was brought out of his thoughts when the girl opened a door and stepped aside for Orochimaru to go inside. When he did, he winced. Kabuto was lying on the hospital, covered in bandages, and he had several kinds of painkillers being pumped into him. He turned to the girl and dismissed her. She narrowed her eyes at him and then walked out, shutting the door firmly behind her. He walked up to Kabuto, studying him. Kabuto's eyes opened and focused on Orochimaru. "What happened to you?" Orochimaru asked with some amusement. "I got my ass handed to me, that's what happened." "I hear you insulted a Chaldea, and a head clan member to boot." Kabuto groaned, closing his eyes, and nodded, then asked, "Orochimaru-sama, What does the Gurmetsuki look like? Well, the iris goes gray and the pupil turns into a star shape. And I think there are triangles in between the points of the star pupil. Why do you ask? Kabuto's eyes shot open and stared at Orochimaru, his mouth wide open. Orochimaru frowned. What is it? Kabuto shook his head and said. The Chaldea that did this to me had the Gurmetsuki. I saw it. He must be the Uzumaki clan head. Orochimaru was silent, staring at Kabuto. What does he look like? He asked quietly. A boy, about 12, I'd say almost 13. Blonde spiky hair with very unusual blue eyes. Yes, he must be an Uzumaki, as they all had blonde hair and blue eyes. Anything else? I didn't really see what he was wearing, but what stuck out the most were 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek. Orochimaru nodded and turned to leave. I shall look at this boy and see if what you said is true. And with that he left, intent on finding this boy. And, after a while, he did. The boy was standing in a street with a boy and a girl, obviously his teammates. Orochimaru smirked, seeing the boy's clan symbol. He narrowed his eyes, thinking. What are you doing? He whirled, caught by surprise, scowling. And then realized that the woman he was now facing was a Chaldea. Why are you spying on my students? Orochimaru gave a small bow and said. I am so sorry, but I wanted to ask the blonde one something. Naruto, what do you want with him? She asked, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Damn, demon nins were so suspicious. Orochimaru frowned and said, if it was really him who really beat the shit out of assistant. The woman laughed and said, yes it was. May I meet him? No one's dared to hurt my assistant before. The woman raised her voice. Naruto. The blonde appeared in a moment, eyeing Orochimaru warily. Orochimaru noticed that the boy did not yet have his Chaldea badge. Orochimaru looked at the boy, noticing the Gurmetsuki flash briefly at him. He gave a small bow. You must be Naruto-kun. I would like to congratulate you on being able to hurt my assistant. Not many are able to do that. I am Orochimaru, by the way. The boy didn't say anything, but he crossed his arms, glancing at his teacher. Orochimaru felt annoyed with this. He turned to the woman and asked, is Naruto-kun participating in the Chunin exams? The woman hesitated and nodded. The boy blinked, obviously not knowing of this. Orochimaru frowned and turned back to Naruto, saying, as repayment for beating up assistant, I want you to keep his presence as a spy a secret, got that? The boy slowly nodded. Thank you, Naruto-kun. I will see you at the Chunin exams. And he then walked off to go back to Kabuto. When Orochimaru had gone, Kometo turned to Naruto and said, be careful of that man, Naruto. He is up to something. I have the feeling that it isn't good. Naruto nodded and said, he didn't seem too worried about his assistant. Doesn't surprise me. Came a new voice and they both turned to see Kazuo approach them. He clapped Naruto on the shoulder and said, I must say, you did an excellent job on Kabuto. I haven't laughed that hard in ages. Kometo frowned and sighed. Baka. Kazuo frowned and then shrugged. Where's Kenjiro? Kometo asked. Watching Snake Boy. Where else? Orochimaru wouldn't try anything rash in front of Kenjiro, cause Kenjiro would kill him in a second. Kometo nodded and sighed. He's up to something, I can feel it. When Orochimaru was alone in a local hotel, he sat there, thinking. He knew that Kenjiro was watching him, so he couldn't get at Naruto within the village. But, maybe, during the Chunin exams. He chuckled, liking the idea. Kenjiro and Kometo can't always watch over the boy. Or, Akimaru then spent the rest of the evening plotting ways to get Naruto in his hands. It was 3 weeks until Orochimaru and Kabuto were able to leave and the village relaxed slightly. They didn't like their presence one bit, and the snake Sanin had something inhuman about him. Naruto, however, was too busy to worry about things like that. After extreme training, he had mastered the Gurmetsuki, surprising everyone on how quick he learned. He had also finished the Dansu Sono Aki Byoku, Sudaringusu, and the Ni Doru. What he also did, is that he had altered the Sudaringusu, so that he could use it offensively by hardening the chakra and forming a kind of blade that cut through almost anything. Also, he noticed that when he cancelled his Dansu Sono Aki Byoku, the Ra briefly went from one part to 9 separate tales. This made Naruto curious, and he decided to experiment with that later, but right now, he was in the kitchen with Keiko and Masaru, eating a strange curry that Naomi had made up. It was rather nice actually, though Masaru didn't seem so fond of it. Keiko turned to Naruto and asked, "We almost forget to ask you, when were you born?" 10th October, why? She frowned and shrugged, saying, "We have to keep birth records you know, otherwise we don't know who's who." It's the 10th next week, isn't it? Masaru nodded, and then grinned. Naruto shrugged it off. Returning to his meal, Keiko looked at him and said, "I heard you're taking the Chunin exams in a couple of months." Naruto grinned and nodded, saying, "Yeah, and I'll beat them all. And show them the meaning of the name Uzumaki." Naruto was a little angry. Okay, scrap that, he was pissed. It was only meant to be a friendly one-on-one spar with Keiko, but she just had to take it one step further. Naruto was low on chakra, and it didn't help that she would use S-rank genjutsu, the speciality of her clan, on him in an attempt to wear him down. Damn, she was a sneaky bitch. She smiled at him and her hands flew through the seals, saying, "Shingai Mero no Jutsu, Terror Maze Technique." Ah, shit. Then, the environment around him changed and he found himself surrounded by tall dark-looking hedges. He looked behind him and all he saw was a long corridor with the hedges as walls. It was the same as in front of him. Suddenly, a loud wailing started, ousing the blonde to flinch at the volume. He sighed. Great, another genjutsu. Has she no limit? The wailing took on a shriller note and Naruto was reminded of a certain pink-haired female back in Konoha. This genjutsu was something that she had developed on her own. It put the victim in the illusion of a maze and then showed them horror after horror, and it was quite possible to give someone permanent physiological damage. Nice. He concentrated, gathering his chakra in his eyes, and he smirked, feeling the genjutsu dispel around him. He then felt extremely drained as the sparring field came into view again. Keiko looked at him and asked, "You alright, Naruto?" Keiko, I think you overdid it that time." "What do you mean?" Before he could even answer, Naruto collapsed from chakra exhaustion. Not before calling Keiko a bitch, mind you. Keiko blinked and then blinked again. She walked over to Naruto's sleeping form and shook him slightly. She narrowed her eyes and said, "Oops, yes, just a little bit." A familiar voice sounded in her mind. "Sorry, Kenjiro-sensei, I guess I got carried away. Just a little bit, take him to the hospital. Now." Keiko sighed and threw Naruto over her shoulder. He was quite light, so she didn't complain much. Naruto slowly woke up and frowned. He could smell detergents and a few other chemicals. I must be in the hospital, he decided. He was then aware of a small pressure on his stomach. It was light and warm. Then, he heard a voice. "Carly, get off. What if mother finds you here?" Naruto liked the sound of her voice. It was sweet. But not too sweet. He slowly opened his eyes and saw the girls that had escorted Orochimaru. He then looked down at his stomach and blinked. Lying, curled up on his stomach, was an Arctic fox cub. The fox was staring up at the girl's gray eyes with a disgruntled expression on its face. "Carly, please, if mother finds you annoying the patients, we'll both get in deep trouble. You know how mother is." The little fox made a small sad noise, but didn't move. "Carly, I'll force you." Naruto watched the scene with amusement and decided to sit up, using the cub to yelp and fall into his lap. The cub, a female, glared up and he couldn't help but laugh. The girl looked a little shocked and bowed to him slightly. "Ah, sorry, Uzumaki-sama. I'll take Carly away now." "No, it's all right. And can you call me Naruto please?" "Hi, Naruto-sama. What's your name?" he asked curiously. "Ah, Yurikoyoko, Kitsunhai Yurikoyoko." Naruto recognized the last name. The Kitsunhai clan were a minor clan that specialized in medical and ice jutsus. They mainly worked in the hospital, with only a few fighting shinobi. Naruto looked at himself and realized that he was wearing a plain t-shirt and shorts. He looked at the pale girl and asked, "Can I have my own clothes back now?" The girl smiled and exited the room, leaving Naruto alone with the fox. Naruto looked down at the fox, who was staring up at him with wide eyes. Naruto grinned and scratched the fox behind the ear, watching as Carly crooned, closing her eyes. He stopped and the fox growled. Don't stop, that feels good. A little voice said. Naruto jumped and then stared at the grinning fox, who waved her tail. The fox then nuzzled his hand and he resumed scratching her ears. Ah, thank you. Naruto stared, the fox was talking. Well, no, not in a sense. Kyuubi said. What do you mean? She is talking in her own language, but you can understand her because of me. Cool, huh, are you trying to be funny? Would I ever do such a thing as that? Kyuubi said, faking innocence. Naruto ignored Kyuubi and turning his attention to Carly. The little fox looked up at him and said, You've been sleeping for 3 days. You must have been tired, Ni-san. Are you feeling better now? Naruto smiled and said, Much. Thank you for worrying. Naruto-sama, who are you talking to? Naruto looked up to see Yuriko staring at him, his clothes in her arms. Naruto laughed and scratched his head. I'm talking to Carly. Oh, the girl said, but she didn't seem to know what else to say. There was an awkward silence for a while, then Naruto asked, Can I get dressed now? The girl jumped and then blushed slightly. Ah, sorry Naruto-sama. I'll leave so you can get changed. Mother said that you are allowed to leave when you have finished. Thanks, he said as she left the room, leaving him alone with Carly. He sighed, rolling his eyes. Before changing into his regular clothes, he then turned to the fox and asked, Can you show me the way out? The fox nodded and jumped into his arms, snuggling close to him. Naruto exited the room and looked around at the straight white halls. How dull. Carly nudged his cheek to point him the right direction. Obediently, Naruto followed the direction that Carly had pointed him in. The little white fox directed him down several other corridors to the main reception area. Thanks, he said, giving Carly a scratch behind the ears as a reward. She crooned and said, No problem, Ni-san. Just then, Naruto saw Yuriko's figure exiting the hospital. He easily caught up to her and tapped her shoulder. She yelped and whirled around and then blushed. Ah, you scared me, Naruto-sama. Sorry, please don't be. Naruto cocked his head and narrowed his eyes in thought. She seemed shy and very evasive. She seemed to be the one that tried to stay out of trouble. Carly crooned in a reassuring way and Yuriko smiled and picked her up from Naruto's arms. Just then, Naruto's stomach decided to rumble. They blinked and stared at it. Naruto then frowned and said, I think I better have some ramen. The pale girl looked at him and blinked. You like ramen? Naruto grinned widely. Yes, I live for ramen. The girl giggled and asked, Do you want to get some? I was just on my way for some. Really? Can we go now before I die from withdrawal symptoms? I mean, I haven't had ramen in 3 days. 3 days. It's a crime. The girl's giggle turned into laughter and she smiled at him. I like you, you're funny. Naruto grinned as they neared their destination, looking at the ramen bar before sitting himself on a stall. Yuriko sat herself next to him, placing the cub on the table, who immediately went up to Naruto and nuzzled his hand in a begging manner. He sighed as he scratched the cub's ears. The owner came up to them smiling. Hello Yoko-chan, and Naruto-sama. How are you? Naruto yawned and stretched. I'm hungry. Ah, what do you young couple want? I'll have miso ramen please. I'll have pork thank you. The man nodded and moved away to deal with their orders. Naruto looked at the girl and asked, What do you do? Are you training to be a medic nin? Yes, I want to become a medic nin and join a team. Naruto nodded and then grinned as 2 steaming bowls appeared in front of them. Ah, itadakimasu, he exclaimed before diving into the bowl with haste. Yuriko laughed slightly. Why and then started on her bowl, almost as enthusiastically as Naruto. What are you going to do, Naruto-sama? She asked between mouthfuls. Naruto paused, thinking, well, I will stay here and become an elite chaldea. I'm going to Konoha soon to take the Chunin exams, so I'll go there and show them what it means to kick ass. She chuckled and then asked, What about your clan? She then looked away as she realized how personal the question on. Ah, sorry, that was personal. What's so personal about it? Naruto asked. Yuriko looked at him and blinked in a confused manner. What do you mean? She asked. Well, isn't it obvious? The other clan heads will marry me off so that the clan can be rebuilt. I don't mind. I've never had much of a family before I came here. It would be nice to have a family of my own here. Oh, was all she said before falling silent and staring into her now empty bowl. Naruto shrugged and asked the man for another bowl. When Naruto got home, and don't ask how many ramen bowls he ate since they lost count, he immediately came face to face with a grinning Keiko. About time. I was starting to get worried. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. Naruto stared at her and then finally shrugged, moving further into the house. Keiko skipped alongside him with an "I know something" look on her face, and it was starting to irritate him. They reached the kitchen and Naomi smiled at them. "Tea?" she asked. "Please," came the response from the pair. "So, Naruto, who's your girlfriend?" Keiko asked. Naomi looked around and stared at the two cousins. Naruto stared at her and asked blankly, "What do you mean?" Keiko sighed and rolled her eyes. "I saw you with a girl at a ramen stand. It was obviously a date." Naruto blinked and then blushed slightly. "It wasn't a date. Yuriko looked after me when I was at hospital, no thanks to you. When I left the building she was going out as well. We were hungry, so we went for ramen. We're just friends." Keiko snorted with disbelief. "Yeah right, shut up," Naruto growled, his blush getting worse. Keiko laughed and said in a sing-song voice, "Naru-chan's got a girlfriend. Naru-chan's got a girlfriend." Naruto made a disgusted noise and turned away. Naomi came over and handed him his tea, which he sipped gratefully. "Who is it?" Naomi asked curiously. She said her name was Kitsunhei Yuriko. "Yeah, that's it." Suddenly Keiko stopped teasing and stared at Naruto, and then burst out laughing, causing Naruto to scowl at her. "What's so funny?" he demanded. Keiko looked at him again and carried on laughing, her tea forgotten. "Oh dear," Naomi sighed, looking at her daughter. "What are we going to do with her, Naruto?" "Stick her in a mental home," Naruto suggested brightly. Naomi laughed lightly and then hugged him. "Welcome home." Later, Naruto wanted to kill Keiko. She was like your average woman, a great gossiper, and gossip she did. Naruto wouldn't have minded if she told a few people, but it was the fact that she told everyone that made him wonder if anyone would miss her. For some reason, the clan heads were pleased about this, and Naruto had absolutely no reason why. So he sulked for a few days, trying to figure out the best killing method to use on his beloved cousin. He had also noticed that Keiko and Kichiro had suddenly started hanging out with Yuriko. Naruto was not sure why everyone made such a huge fuss about it. He and Yuriko were just friends. Naruto looked down at Carly, who was curled up asleep in his lap, and sighed. Ever since meeting Yuriko and Carly, the little fox always sought him out, causing a very worried and concerned pale girl to chase after her, causing Naruto and her to meet up. Finally Naruto gave in and arranged to meet up every day so that the little fox saw him every day and to prevent the little thing to chase after Naruto. Keiko teased him about it night and day, making him wish that she would just leave him alone before he turned homicidal on her. "Naruto-kun, are you listening?" Naruto snapped out of his thoughts and looked over at Yuriko, who was looking him in a worried manner. Naruto grinned and rubbed his head saying, "Ah, sorry, I got lost in my thoughts." She cocked her head in a cute manner before shrugging and looking at the fox in Naruto's lap. "Do you like her?" she asked. Naruto looked down at Carly and shrugged, saying, "I guess I do. She seems good company. That and she's cute." He scratched the cub's ears and the little creature made a soft crooning noise in her sleep. Yuriko smiled and said, "I can get you one if you wish." Carly was a present from another minor clan. Naruto stared at her and asked, "Can you really?" "Yes, if you want one." Naruto smiled and grabbed her in a hug. "Please, you're the best, Yuriko." The pale girl blushed and said, "No problem, Naruto-kun." Naruto muttered several curses under his breath, quite pissed off. He was hot, tired and hungry, but he couldn't give up, especially with Kuro there watching him. "Oh, stop complaining," Kuro said before grinning and dodging the kunai sent his way by the enraged blonde. "Do you want to do this?" Naruto shouted. Kuro cocked his head and said, "It's your idea, and your bloodline. Then shut up." Naruto had for the last few hours been playing around with his Sonoaki Byoko no Mai. He had noticed before the chakra died down completely, it separated into 9 separate strands. Naruto was curious about this and decided to experiment with it, so far not getting much of a result. He had managed to get 9 separate strands, but they were slightly unstable and disappeared soon after. Naruto sighed, closing his eyes and concentrated on manipulating his chakra into the 9 strands. Sweat gathered on his brow as he concentrated on keeping the flow of chakra in the positions he wanted. Naruto, Kuro said, I'm trying to concentrate. Naruto growled, I think you did it. Naruto slowly opened one eye and then the other. He blinked as he stared at the solid-seeming chakra that surrounded him. Kuro grinned and shouted joyously. You did it. Naruto grinned. Kuro then smirked evilly before drawing 3 kunai and throwing them at Naruto. For some reason, Naruto didn't react, and he stared at the kunai. Then, just as they were about to impale his whiskered face, they stopped. Both teens blinked in confusion. Naruto looked closely at the kunai before saying quietly, Kuro, the chakra stopped it. I didn't do anything, I swear. Kuro frowned and shrugged. Ask Kometo-sensei when we get back. She might know what's going on. Naruto reached up to grab a kunai, but it seemed that the chakra had other ideas. With a jerk, the chakra threw the 3 kunai at Kuro with deadly accuracy. Kuro only managed to dodge by sinking into the ground and then resurfaced when it was safe. What the fuck did you do? Kuro demanded angrily. I didn't do anything, I swear. Naruto replied defensively as the chakra faded. Naruto went over to Kuro and helped him stand. Kuro growled and said, that blasted chakra has a mind of its own. You should be careful with that. Yes, mother. Naruto said sarcastically. Kuro glared at him, which caused Naruto to start laughing. Oh, shut up, Kuro said. They sat there for a few moments and then Kuro asked, you coming over mine tonight? You can meet me later. I need to go meet Yuriko soon. Kuro's expression turned sly. So, when are you two going to be serious? Oh, not you two. I have enough of Keiko doing that. Yoko and I are just friends, okay. Kuro chuckled and said, your reaction is so telling me the opposite. Shut up. Fine. I was just asking you about your girlfriend. I give up. So you're going to admit it. Ellipsis. Ha. I knew it. Kuro. Yay. Shut up. After that training session with Kuro, Naruto went into town to go meet Yoko. He got bored of saying Yuriko all the time, so he shortened her name to Yoko, unfortunately. That caused Keiko to say things like, you're giving her pet names. It's a sign. Naruto approached the ramen stand to see that Yoko was already there. She saw him coming and waved at him. He smiled at her as he sat down, saying, how are you, Yoko? I'm fine. Doing a lot of training, but I enjoy it. Hee. I've just been training with Kuro and I think I made a variation of one of my clan techniques. She smiled at him and said, that's great, Naruto-kun. I wish I could do that. He patted her arm and said, don't worry, I'm sure you will. That was when Yoko saw he various cuts on his arms from the training session. She gasped and he blinked at her. What is it? He asked. Those cuts. Let me heal them. They'll heal, he said to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen to him. She grabbed his arm and started to heal the cuts one by one, Naruto watching the whole time. When she finished, she inspected her handiwork and nodded, satisfied. He stared at her and she blushed under his intense gaze. Thank you so much, Yoko-chan, he said, smiling at her. Her blush deepened and she mumbled, no problem. He chuckled lightly and decided to order some ramen, since that was what they normally ate when they were together. That night, Naruto lay in bed awake. He yawned softly and turned over. He was on a futon in Kuro's room. Naruto went over his house from time to time. His parents were very nice and always happy to have Naruto over. Naruto truly liked it here. He sighed as he realized that he would be going back to Konoha soon. He wondered what their reactions would be. Fear most properly, knowing those narrow-minded fools. But he had a feeling that it was going to be oh so fun. The pranks he could pull on those poor, pathetic, unsuspecting village people. He chuckled darkly before closing his eyes. And he also wondered what his classmates' reactions will be, and he wondered briefly if they were going to be in the Chunin exam. Not likely since they were rookies, but he was rookie too, so he shouldn't say anything. Naruto fell asleep thinking of all the things he could do to the village that was his home. Naruto grumbled slightly. He didn't want to wake up today, he didn't feel like it. Today was his birthday, a day that he didn't really celebrate. Who was there to celebrate it with anyway? He yawned and settled in to get some more sleep. And he almost did, if it weren't for the door opening. He lay still, hoping the person would go away, but alas, that person didn't. Naruto Nichan, he heard Kiko's younger brother say as he jumped onto the bed. Go away, Naruto grumbled. Masaru pouted and jumped on top of the poor blonde. Naruto kicked the younger boy off and said, what is it? I'm trying to get some sleep here. Masaru cocked his head and said, but Naruto Nichan, everyone's waiting for you. Why? Was the intelligent answer. The boy sighed and rolled his eyes saying, it's your birthday. What's that got to do with anything? Naruto asked, trying to get his covers back from the irritating youth. Masaru blinked at him and asked, don't you celebrate your birthday Nichan? No, Naruto said, yanking the duvet and causing the boy to yelp and fall onto the floor. Masaru glared at him and took hold of the duvet again. Well, it's your birthday and we're going to celebrate it. So get dressed. If you're not in the living area in the next 20 minutes, I'll set Keiko Nichan on you. I know how much you hate being teased by her on Yoko Nichan. Naruto growled and threw the boy out of the room, slamming the door shut. He sighed and went into the bathroom. He took a quick shower and got dressed in his normal everyday clothes. He was so happy that he didn't have to wear that terrible orange jumpsuit anymore. He sighed and made his way to the living area, feeling slightly apprehensive. He paused at the door, listening as to what was going on inside. But he couldn't hear anything. He frowned. Was this some kind of joke? Slowly, he opened the door to look inside. He blinked as Keiko suddenly glomped him, sending him to the ground with a yelp. Happy birthday Naru-chan, she said in a sing-song voice. Naruto glared up at her. Get off, he growled. She grinned at him, but got off him anyway. She helped him stand up and grabbed his arm, pulling him into the room. He blinked when he saw who were in the room. The clan heads and all the Chaldia were in the room, and Yoko. He blinked in confusion. What was going on here? Hiraku stepped forward and clapped Naruto on the shoulder. Happy birthday. What? Was the blank reply from the blonde. Masaru jumped forwards and said to the confused blonde. It's your birthday. We're here to celebrate it. Naruto blinked again, still in a state of shock. Keiko linked her arm with his and he looked up at her. I take it that you never did celebrate your birthday at home. Hey, figures. Never mind. Want to open your gifts? Naruto blinked again and then nodded. Kichiro hugged him around the neck. Ah, poor Naru-chan. We'll make this your best birthday ever. Naruto suddenly grinned and said quietly. Thanks everyone. Well, enough of that. Over to the presents. Kichiro cried and dragged the blonde over to a pile of wrapped packages that was beside his aunt, Naomi. She smiled at him and ordered. Sit down. He sat down in front of her, aware that Keiko sat next to him and, strangely, Yoko on the other side. Happy birthday, Naruto-kun. She said shyly. He smiled at her brightly. Thanks Yoko-chan. He was brought to attention when something was dropped into his lap. He blinked and looked down at it. It was from Hiraku. He opened the largish parcel and out fell 2 scrolls. He picked one up and it read, Rasengan. Rasengan? He asked. Yes, it's a jutsu that was developed by your clan. Very hard to master that one. Look at the other one. Naruto picked up the other scroll and his eyes widened. Written on the scroll were the words, Fox Summoning Scroll. He grinned all of a sudden. Putting the 2 scrolls aside to have a look at later. Another present was dropped in his lap and he looked at who it was from. It was from Toshiro. He opened the present and he was presented with another scroll. It was a scroll on the invisibility jutsu. Oh, the things he could do with that. The next present, which was from Yoshi, was a scroll on poisons. It had information on how to extract them. Their properties and antidotes. Very useful. The present from Susumu was a gold ring. It wasn't any kind of ring, but his clan ring. It was pure gold, engraved with silver. It had his clan symbol on it. He smiled as he placed it on his right index finger, finding that it fitted exactly. He then turned his attention to the present from Arata, the strange mystic. It was a small, round clear gem. He studied it for a few moments and then turned to the Kobayashi clan head in confusion. "What's this for, Arata-kun?" "A crystal ball. You can view events rough it, discover the rest on your own." Well, he thought, that was a lot of help. He shrugged and turned his attention to the other presents. The first one he got was from Naomi. He opened it up and laughed when he saw what it was. It was a ramen cookbook. He looked through it, grinning at all the recipes inside. He then, reluctantly, put it aside. The next present handed to him was from Keiko. It was a pair of fox-shaped ear-rings. Why did you give me this, Keiko Onichan? Because I'm paying for you to get your ears pierced, silly. I wouldn't give you the ear-rings if you didn't have the piercings. We'll be going out later. He gave her a growl, but looked away from her to open the present from Masaru. When he saw it, he grinned and exclaimed, "Masaru-kun, you're the best. It was a prank collection kit. I'll be using that soon, kukuku." The others in the room exchanged worried glances. The next present was joint effort by Kenjiro and Kometo. He looked at the largish box with interest. He ripped package open and saw engraved on the wooden case, "Weapon set." Interested, he opened it up and looked at the vast collection of kunai and shuriken in the box. He then frowned in confusion. Instead of being dark color, these were a light gray color. They're made from a special metal that can be infused with your chakra, making them stronger and cause more damage. Hope you use them well, Kometo said, while Kenjiro remained silent beside her, though Naruto swore him mutter something about expensive weapon sets. Kichiro's present came next. He opened the small parcel and it was a necklace with a small locket on it. He opened up the locket. One side had no picture. He looked at the other side at the picture and smiled. It was a picture of him and his team. "Thanks, Kichiro-chan. That's all right. I thought it was nice as well." The next present, from Kuro, was a trouser chain, which Naruto chuckled at and placed on his leather trousers. Liking the effect. "Very sexy, Naru-chan," Keiko teased. "I know. What do you think, Yoko-chan?" "I like it. It looks good on you," she replied with a smile. Keiko snickered beside him. "Here's my present," Yoko said, before handing Naruto a wooden box. He opened it up and blinked. Inside the box was a small Arctic fox. When Naruto opened box, the fox opened his dark eyes and looked up at him as if to say, "You woke me up." He reached in and picked up the fox cub, which made no objection, and placed it in his lap. Carly came up to Naruto and sniffed at the newcomer, who was sniffing her back. They looked to be about the same age. The two foxes soon lost interest with each other and the cub in Naruto's lap started to sniff him, crawling all over him, making Keiko snicker. Soon, the fox calmed down and was content to sit in the blonde's lap, letting him scratch behind the ear. "That feels good," he crooned, wagging his tail slightly. "Thanks, Yoko-chan. You still have to name him," she said, smiling at him. He thought for a little bit and then it hit him, Kichi. "I'll name him Kichi. I like the cub, now named Kichi," said, snuggling close to the blonde and giving a contented sort of purr. "Sounds good," Yoko said, hugging her own cub close. Keiko, Kuro and Kichiro leaned forwards to get a closer look at the cub, who stared back at them. After a little while, Kichi blinked, followed by the other three. That made Naruto laugh and get offended expression from the three teens as well as the fox. "Well, lunch I think," Naomi said, standing up and walking out of the room. The adults left the children alone as they were having closer looks at all the presents that Naruto had received. After a quick lunch, Keiko dragged Naruto from the house with the other teens following. She persuaded Masaru to stay at home. They got many greetings from the villagers and even several happy birthdays from them, which surprised Naruto. Keiko just waved at them, while still pulling the struggling blonde down the street, much to everyone's amusement. They soon reached their destination, a tattoo parlor. He blinked in confusion. Keiko said, "Ear piercing, right?" She dragged him inside and called, "Hello, anyone here? I'm here to get Uzumaki's ears pierced." From out the back of the small shop came a large man covered in tattoos and he looked intimidating in his leather outfit, bald head and piercings all over him. He looked down at Naruto and grinned. "Hello, Naruto. He obviously didn't regard anyone with respect, not that Naruto minded. Hello. Ah. Call me Itsuki. Now, what can I do ya for, runt? Runt. The man laughed and shook his head. I hope you don't mind. But I don't give a damn about people's rank. So, just don't call me runt, old man. As long as you don't call me old man. Deal. So, what are you here for? Well, I wanted to get Naru-chan's ears pierced. Keiko spoke up. Itsuki raised an eyebrow. No tattoos. Before Keiko could say anything, the voices of the Snake twins, who had just entered the shop, interrupted her. We'll be paying for that. The man seemed to be pleased with this and took Naruto out back, Keiko and the twins trailing behind them, leaving the others in the front. He sat Naruto down in a chair and pulled on some gloves and got some equipment from the drawers. Naruto watched nervously as the man did his work. Soon, he placed the piercing gun to his ear and pierced his ear. Naruto blinked. It didn't hurt, it was just a surprise. The man did the other ear and then nodded in satisfaction. He then turned to the twins and asked, So, what tattoo are you giving him? A nine-tailed fox, on his shoulder going down, his arm and wrapped around his neck. Naruto blinked and shook his head. It would take a while to get used to that. Itsuki nodded and turned away from them, picking up a pad and pencil. For about 10 minutes, he sat there sketching until he finally turned back to them and asked, Is this the sort of this you had in mind? The face of the fox was on the left shoulder blade, with its body crouched underneath it. Two tails went and wrapped around his left arm, while another one went down his right. One tail went to his right shoulder and wrapped around his neck, coiling back towards the right shoulder blade. Another tail went down and encircled his waist. The other four were curled up down his back, two curling around onto his chest on either side. Cool, Naruto whispered, giving a small grin. We'll have it red, as the fox is that color. I don't want to do him any disrespect. To bloody right. Naruto sighed and nodded. Right, remove your top. Itsuki ordered, moving off to collect his equipment to do the piece of art. Naruto sighed as he removed his leather jacket as well as his leather top, revealing his slightly muscled torso. Keiko hummed, and said, You have a nice body, not too skinny and not too muscled. I'm sure Yoko-chan will love that. Naruto glared at her, but didn't reply, instead turning his attention to the tattooist in front of him. Okay, now lie down, he ordered. When the tattoo was done, the man had told Naruto how to take care of the tattoo until it had fully healed. What he didn't know was that Kyuubi had already healed the tattoos for him, so he didn't need to really listen to his advice. Now I have other customers that want tattoos. Naruto jumped down and walked out of the back room without his top on, wanting to show the others his new tattoo. Hey guys, look what Kato and Keitaro paid for, he exclaimed as he jumped into the room, attracting the attention of his teammates and Yoko. Wow, Naru-chan, that's beautiful, Kichiro breathed, looked over the whole tattoo. Yoko was doing the same, a small little smile on her pale face. When they had done, Naruto put his clothes back on and they exited the shop. Won't that tattoo take a long time to heal? Yoko asked, a hint of worry in her voice. Nah, Kyuubi's already healed it, so I don't need to do all the things that the guy suggested. Oh, that's helpful. Yes it is, isn't it? They arrived back at the compound where Naruto wasted no time, showing off his new tattoo to everyone, who rather liked it. Naomi was a little concerned at first, but decided to accept it anyway. They spent the rest of the day lounging around, playing games and such. Or just talking to each other, enjoying the company. Naruto had never been so happy in his life. These people truly cared for him, even going so far as to give him expensive gifts on his birthday. Yes, this was the best day of his life. Around late evening, early night time, Naruto had been sitting with Yoko talking quietly to her when Kenjiro and Kometo came over. Naruto, can you come with us please? Kometo said, beckoning to him to follow her. Confused, Naruto stood and followed the two Chaldea. They led him through the village to the Akikage Tower. He frowned in confusion. Why did they bring him here? They went up to the man's office, where he sat there regarding them quietly. Naruto looked at the man expectantly. "Naruto, happy birthday," the Akikage said quietly. Naruto smiled and replied, "Everyone's been so kind to me. I don't know how to pay them back for it." The man chuckled and said, "They do it out of their love for you, boy. Same thing for you to do is to accept the gifts they give you, and talking of gifts, I have something for you. Come here." Naruto blinked and approached the man, who waved for the blonde to stand beside him. He took a box from the table which Naruto hadn't noticed earlier and opened it up. He took the object out, but Naruto was unable to see what it was. The Akikage reached up and pinned whatever it was to the collar of his leather coat. When he pulled away, Naruto looked down at it and gasped, his eyes widening. It was a Chaldea badge. He looked back up at the man, who nodded, and Naruto could just see a smile. Impulsively, Naruto hugged him. The Akikage was a little surprised at first, but then gave a low chuckle and hugged the blonde back. "What a charming young lad you are. Go off and show your new rank to everyone." "Thank you so much," Naruto cried and went up to his sensei. She smiled down at him and stroked his hair. "Well done, Naruto," she said softly. Naruto grinned back at her. This definitely was the best day of his life. "Sorry it took me so long. Wah, don't hurt me. I just never felt like writing it until now since it's my sister's birthday today. Hee. Sorry. It was kinda funny, my sis having her birthday and me writing about one. So, Chunin exams next, and what do you think of Naru-chan's tattoo?" It was a spur of the moment thing because I realized that the twins didn't get him anything, so I decided a tattoo. The remaining time leading up to the Chunin exams went rather quickly, and it was now 2 weeks until they started. Naruto, as he had finished his clan training, spent his free time learning the jutsus that he had received for his birthday. He also signed the summoning scroll so he was able to summon on-tailed foxes that ranged in sizes and colors. They were pretty cool, thought the boss summon was a bit full of himself. He had started on the Rasengan, but hadn't finished that one yet since He was only on the second stage at the moment. He also didn't even have the chance of starting on the invisibility jutsu that Toshiro had given him. This was mainly because he was trying to figure out how to use the gem that Arata gave him. From what he was able to figure out from it was that he was able to see events in the surrounding area with it and was even able to, somehow, hack into crystal balls that the Kobayashi clan had. He had even met Yoko's clan. They were very nice in his view, but there were loads of them. It was a large minor clan. He had asked Kuro about it. The boy went slightly pink and replied that the Kitsunhai clan were very fertile. So much so, that they had to put birth restrictions on the women to prevent them from overcrowding the village. Since the woman could be very energetic in that area, to put it delicately. He had also learned some other things about his family, like whom his father was, the Yondaime. At first he didn't believe it, but after being talked to by the clan heads, he accepted it. It hurt though, the fact that Konoha never told him these things. He had a right to know about his family and they never told him a single thing. He then also learned that the Yondaime had a sister, who married into the Hyuga clan. But she had died giving birth. Her husband, a branch clan member of the Hyugas, had also died a few years after that. They had a son though, by the name of Neji, whom was also taking the Chunin exams this time round. He was very talented with his bloodline, the reason being was he was so closely related to the original eyes. It was not pure though, so even if he managed to activate it, it would be far weaker than Naruto's since Naruto was a pure blood Uzumaki. Naruto sighed as he got up. It was pretty early, but Kometo wanted to move out so that they could get to Konoha a couple of days before the exams were to start. It was a good way of looking at the opposition beforehand. Naruto washed quickly and donned his clothing and packing everything he needed, going into the kitchen, finding that Naomi was already up, as well as Keiko. He sat down and ate the breakfast given to him by Naomi. When he had finished, they wished him good luck before he left to meet up with his team. Kometo was already there waiting for them. She turned to him and said, "You're early." Naruto shrugged and replied, "I woke up early and got ready quick. There was no point in hanging around about home, so I came straight here." They fell silent again and soon, Kichiro and then Kuro arrived. Okay, ready to go? Kometo asked, receiving 3 nods in return. They arrived at Konoha with 3 days to spare. They were immediately let in by the GAT-E guards after they had shown their passes. Right, we need to go and see the Hokage, Kometo said. She looked back at Naruto, who had been unusually quiet, and said firmly. Behave yourself, Naruto. I don't want you getting into any unnecessary fights. Understand? Naruto looked at her and blinked before nodding. She gave him a firm look before moving off again. Naruto looked about as he walked along, noticing that they were getting stares from the villagers as they walked past. They didn't seem to notice Naruto, but rather the fact that they were Chaldea. They were scared. He chuckled, but decided not to do anything. They arrived at the tower and entered it. Naruto thought that it didn't look as nice as the Akikage Tower. They only had to wait for a small amount of time before they were allowed to have an audience with the old man. Kometo stood in front of the aging Hokage and said, I am Dakini Kometo. This is my team, Taraka Kichiro, Asura Kuro and Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto, the old man exclaimed, looking at the said boy. Naruto turned calmly to regard the old man. Hello, he said, not really interested in talking. The Sandaime eyes trailed to the Chaldea badge that Naruto was wearing, as well as his headband around his neck. He gave a sigh and asked wearily, So, you're a demon nin, are you? Are you staying that way? Naruto frowned. What kind of stupid question was that? Of course, it's much better in Akigakure than it was here. That's my home now, and I have no intention of leaving. They're not afraid of me, they respect me. And I found out about my clan. How come you never told me about my father? Or my cousin? Because you weren't ready for it yet. Not ready, my ass. You just didn't want me to know, did you? Everyone was afraid of what I could do. There was a tense silence in the room, broken by Kometo. I think we should go and get somewhere to stay. It's been a long journey and we're tired. If you will excuse us. Without waiting for an answer, she herded the 3 out of the room. In silence, they went to town and found themselves a reasonable hotel. It was going to be a long 3 days. Naruto sighed, bored. He was sat on the balcony of his hotel room, looking out over the village. It felt strange to be here after spending all that time in Akigakure. He missed the friendliness of the villagers, who always went out of their way to say hello to each other. Though they were weary of outsiders as they would properly attack the village for its beliefs. The others were out at the moment, leaving him alone. So he decided to go and have a little walk about. No harm in that, is there? As he walked along, people stared fearfully at him and moved out of his way quickly. Some even whispered, Isn't that the demon brat? Naruto ignored these, though, if they even tried to do anything to him, he'll make sure these villagers knew his rank as head clan member. After a while of this, he heard a commotion. Put him down. He frowned. That sounded like Sakura. He peeked around the corner and smirked. In front of his stood 2 Suna nins, 1 female and 1 male. The female was blonde and had a large fan while the male wore black clothing with a large parcel on his back. The Suna male was holding a small brown-haired boy of about 8 years of age, who was struggling to free himself. Naruto spotted 2 other figures and snorted. Sakura and Ryo. They were demanding the Suna nin to let the boy down. Fat chance. Naruto considered interfering and beating the crap out of the male nin, but decided to see what would happen since he could feel a chakra signature in the trees nearby. He watched as the owner of that signature, none other than Uchiha Sasuke, threw a stone at the male's hand. Such childishness, he thought. But it did the job as the male let go of the small boy to turn and glare at Sasuke. The male was about to attack, when another joined, demanding that the male let them be and stop being such a humiliation. Naruto looked at the small male. He was about Naruto's age with blood-red hair and turquoise eyes, lined with black. Naruto thought he resembled a panda somewhat. He could feel hate radiating from this boy. Shukaku Kyuubi hissed and Naruto could feel the demon's irritation. Shukaku. Who's that? Another Biju. Another Biju. Kometo-sensei would want to know of this. He watched as the Sand Nins retreated from the scene in Naruto direction. The Uchiha and the demon host exchanged names. Gaara was the host's name. They walked past the corner that Naruto had been watching the scene from. As they walked past, Gaara turned his head and stared at Naruto. He blonde smirked at him and asked, "Find something interesting, do you?" Gaara stopped and narrowed his eyes at the blonde, who chuckled at this. The host's two siblings stopped as well, eyeing the small blonde. Naruto stood up straight from where he had been leaning against the wall and approached the three, standing in front of Gaara. The two stared at each other for a while and then Naruto grinned. "Hey, Gaara, if I were you, I wouldn't bother with the likes of someone like Uchiha Sasuke. He's weak. You can beat him easily, especially if you have certain advantages," Naruto said before brushing past his Metsuki, flashing unconsciously at the sand nin before he walked off. "We need to go back to Kometo-sensei. If you want. Why are you being like this? Do you have a grudge against the Shukaku?" "Yes, that raccoon is a bastard. When we were young." "Wow, I'm getting an ancient history lesson here." "Shut up, Gaki. As I was saying, when we were younger, that bastard destroyed a village that I was going to and he knew about it." "Grr, why did you want to destroy a village?" "Because they made a religion of killing off demons, that's why. I had to protect myself and other demons somehow." "Okay. Why did you attack Konoha?" There was silence between the two and Kyuubi asked quietly. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes, fine, if you wish. To really understand, you need to know that I have two daughters, Kitsunhai and Nyoko. Kitsunhai was sealed inside a host, which is where the Kitsunhai clan come from, as they are descendants of that Chaldea and have inherited the ice and healing affinities of her. She is now gone. My other daughter Nyoko is somewhere, but I don't know since I haven't seen her since I was sealed." The Konoha Council, without the permission of the fourth, tried to say her inside a baby which they would then raise to be a weapon for Konoha. They failed. When I heard of this, I went into a rage and attacked Konoha to kill those council members. I failed and got sealed inside of you. I have a suspicion that they tried to get their hands on you instead. There, you now know the reason. Just don't hate the village as much as you do now. I don't want you to turn into a monster." Naruto had stopped while the fox was talking to him and he frowned, looking back at the Hokage Tower. "The council members are to blame," he said firmly, and he could feel the demon's relief at those words. He sighed and carried on, not really looking where he was going, and because of that, he walked into someone. He blinked and looked at the person he had walked into. It was a burly man that had been particularly nasty to Naruto when he was younger. The man looked down at him and sneered. "Oh, come have a look at this, guys. The demon Gaki has come back." The man's two friends, who were at a nearby stall, turned around to glare at the small blonde. The street around them went silent as they looked at the Chaldea in the middle of the street. Naruto sighed. He didn't want to deal with this. "What are you doing here? You should have died. No one would miss you, you useless piece of shit," he growled, grabbing the front of Naruto's leather jacket. The blonde growled a warning. But the man did not notice. "Let's teach this junk a lesson," he cried, moving off, his hand still holding onto the coat, obviously wanting to drag Naruto off to beat him up. But, to the man's anger, Naruto didn't budge no matter how much he pulled. Naruto glared at him, his Metsuki activating. "Get off me," he said quietly. The man sneered at him. "Oh, I'm so scared." The blonde smirked and grabbed onto the man's wrist, squeezing slowly. The man cried out in pain as his wrist broke with a snap. Naruto let go and the man dropped to his knees, clutching at his wrist. Casually, Naruto kicked the man in the chest, feeling some of his ribs crack as he went flying backwards and landing in a crumple on the floor. He was aware of movements behind him and he turned just in time to catch the wrist of the fist that had been aimed at him head. He twisted his body, lifting the man up and throwing him into a nearby food stall. He spun and punched the other man in the jaw, sending him down the street with a scream. When that was done, he stood, looking at his work. They didn't get up, but there were muffled moans of pain coming from all three of them. The other onlookers stared at him with fear. "Who else wants a piece?" he asked. They shook their heads, still staring at him. Suddenly, he was aware of Kometo appear on the scene. She took one look and said, "Naruto, I thought I told you not to get into any trouble." They started it. Kometo sighed and shook her head. She turned to the villagers and said venomously, Whoever else tries to attack Uzumaki-sama will have to answer to me. This is a disgrace. Are you trying to humiliate your village by attacking a foreign head clan member? Get out of here, now." The street emptied in seconds. She gave another sigh and turned back to the blonde. "Where were you going before you were attacked?" "I was looking for you. I have to tell you something." She raised an eyebrow. "Did you do something else?" No, I wanted to tell you about Asuna Nin." "What about them?" "This guy, Gaara, is host of Shukaku." She blinked and then smiled. "Ah, I see. I saw something unusual about him. But I know now. I'll have a look at him later." He nodded and went up to her, letting her lead him back to the hotel. "What happened at the street?" she asked. "I was walking along talking to Kyubi when I walked into someone. It was a guy that had been really nasty to me when I was younger. He started calling me names and then tried to attack me. I beat them up." "Ah, nice job. I know. You're full of yourself, you know that." "Yeah. Hiraku told me that regularly." "I'm not surprised. Get up, lazy ass." Kuro growled as he hit Naruto over the head with a pillow. The blonde woke with a start and glared at the other boy. "What was that for?" "What else, Baka? The exams start soon. We have to go and present our entry forms, and here I thought you were a genius." Naruto gave a loud yawn and shrugged. "No one's perfect." Kuro gave him a cold look before turning and walking out of the room, closing the door behind him. There was a shuffling beside him and Kichi poked his head out from underneath the covers and gave him a disgruntled look. "He's moody today." "Nah, he's excited as all. He'll calm down, eventually." Naru, too quickly washed himself and donned his clothes. Kichi jumped into his pocket and made himself comfortable, his little white head poking out. Naruto exited the room to see Kometo and Kuro are there. "Where's Kichiro?" Kuro pulled a face. "She's a woman. They take forever to get ready. If I were you, Kuro, I wouldn't carry on like that." The blonde whispered, pointedly looking at their sensei, who was glaring daggers at the brown-haired boy, who shrugged it off. "Okay, we can go now," Kichiro said cheerfully as she pounced up to them, giving both boys a hug before scratching Kichi's ears. "Okay, Chunin exams, here we come." Sasuke was a little pissed. He had almost got his ass handed to him by a green spandex-wearing freak. If it weren't for the other boy's sensei, the guy, Lee, would have defeated him. Uchiha Sasuke. No one could beat an Uchiha. They are one of the most powerful clans in the Fire Country. It was humiliating to say the least. And it didn't help that Ryo was commentating on how Lee was a taijutsu master and that Sasuke didn't know how to fight one. He paused at the door of where the genins were gathering for the exams, his hand on the door handle. He narrowed his eyes, feeling a slight killing intent from behind those doors. Ryo, behind him, asked, "What's wrong, Uchiha?" Scared, Sasuke shot the grinning boy a glare that could str. It paint off walls and opened the door to walk inside. When they got inside, all the genin turned and glared at them. They glared right back. Sasuke shifted his gaze throughout the room and noted that only one team was not looking their way. They stood in the very center of the room in a circle, blocking everyone out. He could see the faces of two of them. One girl and one boy. The third, smaller even than Sasuke, stood with his back to them. He wore a full-length red leather coat with a strange, yet somehow familiar, clan symbol on his back. He had blonde spiky hair. The Uchiha narrowed his eyes. The boy seemed familiar, and yet he didn't. Also, the killing intent was coming from the small blonde. "Sasuke-kun," a voice called, making him wince. He was then hugged from behind by Ino. "Get off, Sasuke-kun," Sakura cried, and the two started arguing over their Sasuke-kun. Ino's other two teammates came up, greeting them as Sasuke roughly shook Ino off him. Ryo laughed at him and patted him on the back, saying, "Poor Uchiha, having to deal with all those fangirls." Sasuke growled at the boy as Kiba and his team approached. "This ought to be fun," Ryo observed to Shino, who was looking about the room. "You ought to be quieter, you know," came a new voice. The 9 rookies turned to see a white-haired man standing beside them, playing with a deck of cards. He looked at them and asked, "You're rookies, aren't you? What's it to you?" Sasuke asked rudely. The man cocked his head. I just wish to help my fellow Konoha genins. I'm Kabuto. These are my information cards with information on different shinobi. Sasuke looked at the cards with interest. Tell me a name and I'll show you the information on the person. Asuke thought back to when he had met the Sand Nins. Sabaku no Gara. The man nodded and picked up a card. He held it up to them and it showed the boy's name and picture. His stats were unknown. He's had 8 C rank and 1 B rank missions. His stats are unknown, but he has returned from every mission unscathed. Sasuke smirked. He wanted to fight that guy. What about Rock Lee? Ryo asked, leaning forward slightly. Kabuto picked out another card. His taijutsu skills are top-notch. He can't use ninjutsu or genjutsu. Ryo nodded and straightened, his expression thoughtful. Kabuto pulled out a card and held it up to show them its contents. It had information on the number of genin from each hidden village. Sasuke noted that there was one team from Akigakure. Hidden village of the demons. Were they strong? A team has come from Akigakure this time. Strange, a team from there hasn't participated in a Chunin exam in over a decade, in Konoha that is. A team has also come from the new Sound village. They are small and possibly weak. The 3 Sound Nins looked over at the white-haired genin, their faces etched with anger. Weak. One of them asked. We'll show them who is weak. The Sound Nin, who had most of his face covered in bandages, pulled up his sleeve to reveal a strange device on his arm. He and his team moved through the crow. WD unnoticed to appear in front of Kabuto. He swung his right arm at the white-haired man's face, but missed as the man jumped back slightly. Kabuto smirked as the other Sound Nins appeared behind their teammate. Kabuto's face then looked confused as his glasses broke. The then doubled over and spewed his guts out on the floor. The Sound Nin said, "Put this on your info cards, we Sound Nin will definitely be Chunin." The other genin in the room watched, impressed. That is, all except the 3 Aki Nin in the middle of the room. Sasuke and Ryo helped Kabuto to stand up. Impressive, Kabuto said shakily, still recovering. Ryo looked about the room, noticing that the only genin not looking at them were the 3 in the middle. Hey, who are they? He asked, pointing at them. Kabuto gasped, his face going white. He grabbed Ryo's wrist and clamped his other hand over the boy's mouth. What are you doing? Kiba demanded, a little startled by the older man's reaction. What am I doing? He repeated, his voice going a little shrill. I'm stopping this baka from getting us killed. Killed? Sakura repeated dumbly. Yes, they're Chaldea. There was silence around them as the genin around them leaned in to listen to the white-haired man. Chaldea, what's that? Sasuke asked, curious. Were they strong? They had to be if the man reacted like this. Kabuto swore, releasing Ryo. He took a deep breath saying, Chaldea is a special rank in Akigakure, belonging to powerful nins with strange powers. You haven't heard of them because you could only likely to meet one in a B, A, S or SS rank mission. Even then, that's rare. It's strange to see 3 here at the same time. Have you met them before? Shino asked quietly. Only that blonde one, and I'll rather not meet him again, thank you. He's violent. I ended up in hospital for weeks, even with skilled medic nins, with a pole shoved up my. He stopped there, tight-lipped. Your ass, Ryo supplied. Kabuto nodded sharply. There was silence in the room for a few minutes, and then it was broken by the sound of laughter. They turned around to stare at the Sand Nin, Konkuro, who was howling. He pointed at Kabuto and said in between gasps for air, You got beaten by a blonde midget. There was a deep silence in the room, broken by Kabuto's Yubaka. Suddenly, Konkuro stopped laughing as the said blonde appeared in front of him in a yellow flash. Blonde midget, the boy asked in a quiet voice. Kabuto winced and said, He's so screwed. The blonde, who still had his back turned, wrapped his hand around Konkuro's throat and lifted it into the air, as easily as a child would pick up a small doll, even though Konkuro was taller than the blonde. Kuro chalked and tried to get the hand off him, but to no avail. You're dead, the blonde said as he drew a strange light-colored kunai and lifted it as if intending to stab the Sand Nin, who now looked very scared. Naru-chan. Don't kill him now. The blonde's female teammate said in a weary voice, as if used to this kind on behavior. Why not? The blonde asked. He'll die eventually, why not end his pathetic life now? You can't. Wait until the exams start, and then you can kill him. There was silence in the room and then. Fine, but I will get you, makeup boy. The blow. NDE dropped Konkuro and went back to his teammates, leaving a gasping Konkuro on the floor, rubbing his bruised throat. The brown-haired Aki Genin then cracked up saying, I think you scared him. Don't push it, Kuro. The blonde warned as the girl giggled. Sasuke exchanged a glance with Ryo, who was frowning. I don't know why, but I have the feeling that I know him. Ryo said quietly as Sasuke nodded. The Uchiha turned to Kabuto and asked, What's the blonde's name? Kabuto opened his mouth to answer when he was cut off by someone shouting. All right, you scum, calm down. The Chaldea forgotten. The rookie 9 looked at the man who spoke. He had his head covered and his face had several scars on. The man looked around the room and they saw his eyes momentarily widen as he saw the 3 Chaldea. But quickly schooled his expression. The rookie 9 looked at each other, worried. Though Sasuke smirked, he wanted to fight them, especially the blonde one. Naruto S.I.G.H.E.D. to himself as he sat at the back of the room in the corner. He was absently listening to the examiner, Morino Ibiki, telling them about the point system of the test. Not that Naruto really cared, but he listened for the hell of it. All right, you can start now, Ibiki said, looking intently at the genin in front of him. Naruto heaved a sigh and turned the test paper. He scanned the questions and raised an eyebrow. These questions are beyond genin level. Maybe it has something to do with the goal of the test. Maybe. We lose points if we're caught cheating, but that's only if we're caught. That's easy for me. Do it, but wait until half the time is up. Most people should have the answers by then. Just nick them. Naruto nodded and leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs under the table. He scanned the room with his eyes, stopping on each examiner. They glanced at him and his teammates every so often. It seemed as if they were keeping an eye on them. Not that Naruto cared. He leaned his chin in his hands and looked at the person sitting next to him. He blinked in surprise. It was Hinata. Out of all the old academy class, Hinata and Yo were the only ones who were nice to him. They were the reason why he came to the academy at all, though it was mainly Ryo since Hinata was too shy to talk to him, but he liked her all the same. She was sat there twiddling her fingers, looking nervously at the paper. Hinata. She jumped when he softly called her name and she turned to stare at him, wide-eyed. Naruto straightened and she was now able to see the whisker marks on his cheeks. Her eyes, if possible, went wider and her jaw dropped. "And Naruto-kun?" she asked softly. The blonde smirked and replied, "Yeah, it's me." Her face went bright red and she looked down at her paper. She then looked back up, her eyes filled with tears. Where did you go? And why did you leave?" "I left because I couldn't stand it here. And I've been with the demon village all this time. As you can see, I'm a Chaldea." Her eyes went to the badge and she gulped, looking at him fearfully. He gave a sigh and said, "I won't hurt you. I only want to hurt the ones I hate." Oh, hey, have you figured this test out yet? And no, the questions are very hard. You have to cheat, but don't get caught. Use your Byakugan. She blinked at him and then shook her head. "No, I don't want to chance it." The blonde shrugged and closed his eyes. "As you wish." By now, several teams had been disqualified from the test due to bad cheating. Naruto wouldn't get caught. With his eyes closed, he activated his Gurmetsuki. He looked about the room, looking through people and onto their test papers. Occasionally, he had a sneak in on their thoughts to see what they were up to. And he found something very interesting. A couple of the people with the best answers were not genin. They were chunin if his assumptions were right from their thoughts. They had been put there to help the candidates cheat. Very interesting indeed. When he had gotten what he wanted, he opened his eyes and wrote down what he had seen. He then looked up, straight into the eyes of Ibiki, who had been watching him closely. The man's eyes widened when he took in Naruto's Gurmetsuki-filled gaze. He calmed himself down when Naruto deactivated his bloodline, though he still looked very nervous. Naruto waited patiently for the 10th question to be revealed. He looked down at Kuro and Kichiro, who were sat there, their papers complete. Naruto buried his face into his arms, having nothing else to do. "Okay, I will now give you the 10th problem," Ibiki said, looking at them intently. Naruto looked over his AR. So that only his eyes were visible to others. He looked over at a nervous-looking Hinata. Hey, I bet you pass, Hinata-chan. You're well smart, he whispered to her, grinning when she blushed crimson. Ibiki chose that time to speak. Yes, but before that, there is one thing I must say. There will be one special rule for this last question. This is a hopeless rule. First, you are going to have to choose if you wish to take this 10th problem or not. Temari gasped angrily and demanded. Choose. So what happens if we don't take the 10th problem? If you choose not to take it, he grinned maliciously. Your points will be reduced to 0. In other words, you will fail. Your 2 other teammates will fail along with you. What's the meaning of that? Of course we're going to take it. Teammates also failing is bull, someone said. And here is the other rule, Ibiki said, continuing regardless, if you choose to take it and get it wrong, you will lose the privilege to take Chunin exams forever. Everyone in the room gasped and looked worried. Naruto snorted. Yeah, right. He would pass these exams, and this man was going down, kukuku. What kind of a dumb rule is that? Kiba cried, pointing an accusing finger at the examiner. There should be those here that have taken the Chunin exams in the past. Arf, arf. Akamaru barked his agreement. Kichi made an irritated sound. That pup's bark hurt my ears. Naruto fought the urge to laugh and kept his face straight, staring calmly at Ibiki. Ibiki started to chuckle softly. You are unlucky. This year I am the rule. That is why I gave you the option of quitting. Those who are not confident can choose not to take it and take the exam the next year or the year after that. Let us begin. Those who will not be taking the 10th exam, raise your hands. After we confirm your numbers, we will have you leave. The room was quiet as the genin grappled with the decision. They did know. Want to drop out, and yet the threat of not ever being able to take the Chunin exams made them unsure. All of a sudden, one genin raised his hand and stood up. I quit. I won't take it. The team that the dropout was in was promptly failed and sent out. Soon after that, other wimps raised their hands, instantly failing the test for them and their teams. Naruto smirked and gave a loud, tch. Ibiki looked up at him. An eyebrow raised. Have something to say, Blondie? Yeah, Naruto drawled. Those people that just quit are weaklings. They won't make Chunin, so I say screw you, I'm going to pass this exam whether you want me to or not. The man looked amused by the little speech, and snickering could be heard from Kuro and Kichiro. I will ask one more time, Ibiki said, his voice not showing the inner amusement he felt. This is the choice that will impact your life. If you want to quit, now is the chance. There was no response from the crowd of hopeful genins. Ibiki looked over the crowd, his eyes lingering on the blonde in the corner, who was smirking behind his arms. Nice determination. Then, for the first exam, everyone here passes. Most of the genin looked confused and a little shocked. Naruto snickered slightly. I told you we would pass, he said to Hinata, who smiled shyly at him. Wait, what was the meaning of that? Sakura demanded, standing up with an incredulous expression on her face. We pass already. What about the 10th question? Ibiki laughed, and Naruto thought he looked even more scary than when he was straight-faced and serious. There was no such thing to begin with. Or, you can call the 2-choice question the 10th question. What? Sakura asked dumbly. Hey, Temari cried, so what were those previous 9 problems? It was all a waste. No, it's not, Ibiki said, looking away from the genin and out of the window. The 9 problems accomplished their purpose. He looked back at them and continued. The purpose to test each individual's information gathering skills. Information gathering skills? Temari asked. Naruto frowned. So that was what those Chunin were there for. Interesting. First, this test's purpose lies in the first rule. Your pass or fail decision is based on your 3-person teams. By giving that idea, we have given you an unprecedented amount of pressure to try and not be a nuisance to your team. But these test problems cannot be solved by you genins. So that was what the Chunin sitting with us were for. Naruto said calmly. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised. Especially the Chunin and Ibiki. The examiner then smirked and said, You're a smart kid, you know that. How could you tell? Simple really. They were the ones that answered the Questions first so that others could copy off them. That makes sense, Kuro said and then grinned. Looks like you've said something smart for once. Naruto's eyebrow twitched in annoyance. Shut up, he growled. Ibiki chuckled, attracting attention back to himself again, and said, so, most of the people here must have come to the same conclusion as Blondie there. I have to cheat to get points. In other words, this exam assumed that everyone was going to cheat. So, we snuck 2 Chunins who knew the answers to be the targets of cheaters. Only Blondie there noticed this. Those who just cheated like a fool failed. Of course, as he was saying those last words, he removed the bandana from his head saying, why, you may ask, information can have greater value than life and in missions and battlefields. The Genins gasped, their eyes widened when Ibiki showed them the horrific scars on his head. Information is contested with the lives of people. How awful. Burn marks, screw holes and cut marks. They're the scars of torture. Sasuke said. Naruto rolled his eyes, as if it wasn't obvious. Ibiki replaced his bandana and continued with his explanation. The information that the enemy gets after being noticed by a third person will not necessarily be accurate. Remember this. Getting incorrect information can cause great damage to your teammates and village. So, we made you all gather information in the form of cheating. We kicked out those that were lacking in that field. That's what went on. But I still can't agree with that 10th question. Temari said, sounding confused. But this 10th question was the main question of this first exam. What do you mean? Sakura asked. Let me explain. Ibiki said, putting his hands in his pockets. The 10th was a, take it or not take, choice. Needless to say, it was a painful 2-choice problem. Those who did not take it failed with their teams. If you chose to take it, but could not answer it, your right to take the exam would have been taken away forever. It was a very insincere problem. How about this 2-choice problem? Let's assume that you have become a Chunin. Your mission is to capture a secret document. The number of enemy ninja, their abilities and armaments are unknown. And there may be traps that the enemy ninja has set up. Now, will you accept this mission or not? Just because your life and the lives of your teammates may be in danger, are you able to avoid dangerous missions? The answer is, number. There are missions that carry out heavy risks, but cannot be avoided. The ability to show courage to your teammates when needed, and the ability to get through a bad situation, that is what we look for in a Chunin, a squad leader. Those who cannot bet their fate in a critical situation, those who give up when given the chance because there is a next year, and let their minds sway over an uncertain future. Fools who carry a light determination do not deserve to become a Chunin. That is what I believe. I am saying that you here who have chosen to take it gave the right answer for the difficult 10th question. You can deal with the difficulties you face. You have broken through the entrance. The first exam for the Chunin selection ends now. I wish you luck. Naruto rolled his eyes. God, this guy talked a lot. All of a sudden, a dark shape jumped through the window and a banner was thrown across the whole front of the room, held to the ceiling with kunai, blocking Ibiki from view. Everybody, there's no time to be happy. I am the second examiner Mitarashi Anko. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.